Welcome to Potter Read. Today's adventure. Harry unsealed the Founders' forbidden archive at age 8 and learned magic Hogwarts had buried. If you haven't already, smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Now let's begin. Chapter 1. The sealed door. The pipe behind the cupboard wall ticked when the heat came on, and Harry Potter had learned to use it as a clock. 3 ticks meant Aunt Petunia had turned the boiler up, which meant morning, which meant he had perhaps 4 minutes before the bolt scraped back and a voice told him to see to the bacon. 11 ticks and a long silence meant night and the house settling and the particular quiet that belonged to him. He had been counting ticks for as long as he could remember, the way other children counted sheep, except that Harry did not count to fall asleep. He counted because counting told him things, and things told him when he was safe. He was 8 years old, and he had already decided that the world was a lock, and that locks could be opened if you were patient and did not waste your patience being afraid. This morning was a 4-minute morning. He folded his blanket into the precise square Aunt Petunia liked, set his shoes taut, and was sitting with his hands in his lap, blinking like someone newly woken when the bolt scraped and Dudley's shadow filled the gap. "Mum says bacon," Dudley reported with the satisfaction of a boy delivering a sentence rather than a message. "I heard the boiler," Harry said, which was true, and which Dudley would not understand, and which therefore was the safest sort of true. He cooked the bacon. He buttered the toast to the edges because Vernon noticed edges. He poured the tea at the angle that did not splash, and he did all of it while listening to the house, because the house, like the pipe, told him things. The creak above the stairs was Petunia going for her dressing gown. The third stair from the bottom did not creak under Harry because Harry did not step on the third stair. He had mapped the staircase before he had mapped the alphabet. By the time Vernon descended, purpling slightly at the collar as he did every day whether or not anything had happened, Harry had become, as far as the kitchen was concerned, a piece of useful furniture. This was the goal. Furniture was not punished. Furniture was not seen. The being unseen was a skill, and Harry was good at it, and he had begun to suspect that being good at it was itself a kind of secret worth keeping. He noticed the cold that evening. He noticed it because he noticed everything about the cupboard, the way a man stranded on a small island comes to know every stone of it. The cupboard under the stairs was 4 feet wide and not quite long enough for him to lie flat, and it had one bare bulb, a slatted door, a shelf of Petunia's tinned goods that he was not to touch, and a back wall. The back wall was plaster over brick, and brick held the day's warmth into the night the way brick did everywhere in the world. Except that tonight it did not. Harry pressed his palm flat to the plaster low near the skirting where the bulb's light did not reach, and the cold that came off it was wrong. It was not the cold of a wall losing heat. It was the cold of a door left open onto winter, a draft with somewhere to go, and there was nowhere for a draft to go because behind that wall was the foundation of a house in Surrey and nothing else. He took his hand away. He put it back. The cold was still there, and it had a shape, a seam of it, a thin vertical line running down the wall into the floor, as if someone had drawn winter with a ruler. He did not gasp. He had trained himself out of gasping. Gasping was a thing the body did to announce surprise, and announcements were dangerous in a house where being noticed cost you a meal. Instead, he sat back on his heels and did the thing he always did with a new fact, which was to refuse to believe it and refuse to dismiss it at the same time, and hold it there in the cold space between until it told him what it was. A draft from nowhere. Fact, it might be a crack in the brick, venting the crawl space. He could test that. It might be his hand, gone numb against cold plaster and inventing a seam where there was only an ache. He could test that, too. It might be something he had no word for, and the absence of a word was not the absence of the thing. He pressed his thumbnail along the seam. The plaster there was not cracked. It was unbroken, smooth, and cold as a windowpane in January, and the cold ran in a perfect straight line, and bricks did not crack in perfect straight lines. "All right," he murmured, so low it was nearly only breath. "All right, you're real now, what are you?" The bulb buzzed. Upstairs, the house went on settling. And the seam, which could not possibly have hurt him, which was a line of cold on a plaster wall, did the smallest impossible thing. It brightened, not light exactly, a thread of paleness along the cold there and gone, like the ghost of a lit filament behind a closed eye. Harry's heart did something complicated, and he made it stop. He did not push on the wall. He did not call out. He had read enough stolen reading, library reading, the reading he did in the 40 minutes between school's end and the walk home, sitting in the children's corner with a book that was always too easy because the books he wanted were on shelves a librarian would question, to know that the wrong first move in a story was the move made out of excitement. The boys in the stories who found the secret door and shoved straight through it were the boys the story used to teach a lesson. Harry intended to be the one who learned it for free. So he studied the seam and he made a plan, and the plan had 3 parts, and the parts were: observe, isolate, and never be caught observing. He observed for 9 days. The cold seam was not always there. He charted it. He had no paper he could keep. Paper could be found, so he kept the chart in his head in a room he built for it, a habit he had developed years ago without knowing it had a name. He would close his eyes and there would be a shelf, and on the shelf a row of evenings, and on each evening a small mark, cold and bright, cold only, nothing at all. By the fourth day the pattern showed itself, the way patterns did if you fed them enough and did not flinch. The seam woke when the house was empty of attention. Not empty of people, empty of attention. On the night Vernon and Petunia hosted the Palkises and the whole ground floor seethed with talk and the clink of the good glasses, the seam was dead, a pencil line of nothing, though the cupboard was as empty as it ever got. On the night the three of them went to Marge S. and left him with a tin of soup and a list of chores, the seam burned along its whole length, bright as a struck match held to the eye, and a sound came off it that was not quite a sound, a low note he felt in the back of his teeth. When no one in the world was thinking about that wall, the wall woke up. Harry sat with that for a long time on the night the house was empty, and what he felt was not fear and was not greed, it was recognition. He had spent 8 years being unseen, and here was a thing that only existed when it was unseen, and some buried part of him understood it before his mind had words to. The wall and the boy were the same kind of secret. You don't open for people who are watching, he said to it. His voice did not shake. You open for someone who's alone, properly alone, forgotten. The note in his teeth changed. It went up a tone, and he would later swear it sounded like a question. He did not answer it that night. He had a rule, and the rule was that the second move was as dangerous as the first, and he had used his first move learning that the door woke to solitude. He banked the discovery, finished his soup, washed the tin, and went asleep 3 feet from a seam of impossible cold, and slept, because a boy who could not sleep next to mysteries would not have survived the cupboard at all. The chance came in the last week of January. Vernon had a conference, a hotel, a chance to impress men he despised and be despised by men he admired, in a town 2 hours north. And it was the sort of thing one brought a wife to and could not possibly bring a nephew to, and Dudley was going to the Palkises, because Dudley anywhere unsupervised was a liability the Dursleys had learned to insure against. They left Harry a list, a tin, a 5-pound note for the chip shop that Petunia counted out as though it cost her blood, and an instruction not to touch the thermostat, the telephone, or anything else. We'll be back Sunday evening, Petunia said in the doorway in her traveling coat, and she looked at him the way she always did, as though he were a stain she could not get out and had stopped trying to. Don't embarrass us by burning the house down. I won't, Harry said. The car pulled out at 4. By 1:30, the silence in the house had a different quality, a settled, owned quality, the quality of a place that had for 2 days forgotten him completely. No one in the world was thinking about number 4 Privet Drive. No one was thinking about the cupboard. No one was thinking about him, and for once that was not a wound, it was a key. He went down to the cupboard and pulled the slatted door shut behind him, which made no sense, locking himself into a smaller dark inside the larger one, except that it made every sense because the seam wanted to be alone and he was giving it the most alone he could manufacture. He sat, he breathed, he let the house's forgetting deepen. The seam came up like dawn. It started at the floor and climbed, a pale gold light welling along the line of cold, and where it passed the plaster did not crack so much as remember it had once been something else. Patterns surfaced in it, not cracks, letters or near letters, a script that bent in ways Harry's eye could not hold, every character sliding out of focus the instant he tried to read it, as if the writing did not want to be looked at directly any more than the seam wanted to be watched. The cold became a smell, mineral and ancient, the smell of deep places that have never held weather, and then the wall was not a wall. It was a door, and it had always been a door, and the plaster had been the lie, and behind the lie was an arch of pale stone and a flight of steps going down into a dark that had no business existing under a house with no cellar. Harry stayed exactly where he was. Every instinct that had kept him alive said go, said now, said this is the thing you have waited for without knowing you were waiting. And precisely because every instinct said it, he sat still and counted ticks, and there were no ticks because the boiler was off and the silence rang, and he made himself ask the question the excited boy in the story never asked. What opens can close. What is open now might be shut when I want to come back, and I do not know if it shuts with me on this side or the other. He had no answer, so he did the only safe thing he could think of, which was to wedge the experiment open. He took the broom from its hook in the cupboard, Petunia's good broom, the one he was not to use, and he laid it across the threshold, half in the cold and half in the warm, a stick of ordinary wood holding a place in a door that should not exist. If the arch tried to close, it would have to close on the broom, and a closing door that met an obstacle did one of 2 things, and either of them would tell him something. The arch did not close. The broom lay in it undisturbed, half-lit gold, and the cold poured past it unbothered, and Harry understood that he had wedged open a thing that did not care about brooms, and that this told him the door was not a mechanism but a permission, and that permissions were granted, not forced, which changed everything about how he should proceed. He stepped over the broom and went down. The steps were stone, pale as old bone, worn shallow in their centers by feet that had stopped walking them long ago. The walls rose past his shoulders and kept rising. The stair was cut for adults, for many adults, a stair built to carry a crowd, and a crowd had not used it in a long time. The gold light did not come from anywhere. It was simply in the air at the level of his eyes, enough to walk by and not enough to throw a shadow, and the absence of his own shadow was the first thing down here that frightened him, a clean small fright he set aside to examine later. He counted the steps. He counted them because counting was what he did, and because if he ever had to climb them in the dark, he wanted to know how many there were. He reached 211 and stopped counting, not because he tired of it, but because the stair ended, and what it ended in took the count out of his head. A rotunda opened before him, vast enough that the gold light gave out before it found the far side, so that the chamber seemed to have no walls at all, only a floor of pale stone going off into dark in every direction, and a ceiling lost so far up that he could not be sure there was one. Set into the floor, inlaid in lines of some dull dark metal, was a pattern, 4 great arcs sweeping out from where he stood toward 4 distant points, and at each distant point, just at the edge of where the light failed, the suggestion of a passage, a hall, a throat of deeper dark. 4 halls, 4 arcs. And ringing the chamber between the halls half seen, a spiral of doors, dozens of them, set into stone that should have had no room for doors, each one shut, each one different, each one sealed. Harry stood in the center of it and did not feel small, which surprised him. He had expected to feel small. Instead, he felt the way he felt when a problem he had been turning over for weeks finally showed him its shape, that lift in the chest that was almost like joy and was entirely like understanding. This was not a cellar. This was not a bunker or a vault or a hiding place. This was a school. The stair built for crowds, the 4 halls, the worn steps. Someone had taught here, taught many, and then they had stopped, and someone had sealed the doors, and the place had gone down into the dark and waited. How long? Harry said aloud, because the chamber wanted to be spoken to. He could feel it the way he could feel the seam wanting to be alone. Have you been waiting? The answer did not come in words. It came in light. The 4 arcs in the floor woke, one after another, dull metal warming to gold, and the warmth ran out along them toward the 4 halls and back, and as it returned a sound rose with it, voices, or the memory of voices, 4 of them, braided so tightly Harry could not separate one from another. They did not speak English. They did not speak any tongue he knew. And yet the meaning arrived in him whole, the way the meaning of the seam had arrived, bypassing his ears and his slow reading and going straight to the place that understood. Who comes to the Underschool uncalled? Harry's mouth went dry. He thought about lying. He always thought about lying. Lying was a tool, and tools were not good or evil, only suited or unsuited to the job. He examined the lie he might tell, a name, a borrowed importance, a claim, and he discarded it because the chamber had asked who comes uncalled, which meant it already knew he had not been called, which meant a lie about his importance would be a lie it could already see through. You did not lie to a thing that had already caught you in the truth. A boy who wasn't invited, he said. Harry, I found the door. It opened when no one was watching. A beat. I think it opened because no one was watching me either. I think we're the same kind of thing, you and me. I think that's why I could see the cold. The voices considered him. He felt the consideration as a pressure on the skin, not unkind, only enormous, the attention of something that had been attentive to nothing for a very long time and had forgot how to be gentle with it. You reasoned, the voices said, and there was something in the braid now that had not been there, an edge, a focus, as if of the 4 voices one had leaned forward. The first hall is reason's opposite and reason's root. It does not open to the clever. Would you be tested, uncalled one? What happens if I fail the test? A pause. Then with something that in a human throat might have been the beginning of respect, you ask the right question first. Few did. What happens? The stare forgetsu. You climb it and find plaster and never find the seam again. You keep your life. You lose this. Harry weighed it. He stood in the dark at the heart of a buried school and weighed the loss of a thing he had owned for 9 days against the risk of a test he did not understand. And the weighing did not take long, because he had been losing things his whole life: meals, sleep, the assumption that he was loved, and the one thing he had never been allowed to lose was the chance to understand. Everything in him that was worth anything was built around that chance. He would not walk back up the stair to plaster. He would rather fail. Test me, he said. One of the 4 arcs flared brighter than the rest, the one sweeping toward the hall on his right, where now, at the edge of the failing light, a single door stood out from the spiral, taller than the rest, banded in iron gone black with age, and on it, worked in relief, a beast he half recognized from the heraldry in his 2 easy library books. A lion, rampant, jaws open, but the open jaws held no roar, they held a word, a single carved word in that sliding script, and as Harry looked at it, the script steadied just for him, just long enough to read. It said courage. The first hall is Gryffindor's, the braid said, and now the leaning voice took the front of the braid entirely, warmer than the others, rougher, a voice with a grin somewhere behind it. What we kept here was called the edged word. The world above was taught to fear it. The world above was taught many fears. The grin faded. The test of the first seal is not of cleverness, boy, for the first founder had little patience for the clever and less for the brave who were only loud. Answer and answer true, and do not reach for the answer you think we wish to hear. The carved lion's jaws moved, the word courage crumbled out of them and reformed, and the question came. What is courage worth to a boy who has never been safe? Harry stood very still. He understood in the way he understood the most important things that this was not a riddle with a trick in it. There was no clever inversion to spot, no pun, no hidden assumption to overturn. The lion did not want to be outwitted. The lion wanted the truth, and the truth was a dangerous thing to give to a stranger, and he had spent his whole life learning never to give it. The Dursleys had taught him that the truth about himself was a weapon other people used on him. Hide the bruises. Hide the hunger, hide the wanting. Never let them see what you love, because what you love is what they take. And here was a buried god of an old school asking him for exactly that, the one thing he had built 8 years of armor around. The clever answer rose first, because the clever answer always rose first, and Harry let it rise so he could look at it and put it down. The clever answer was, courage is worth nothing to a boy who has never been safe, because such a boy has no choice. What looks like courage is only the absence of options, and a thing with no alternative is not brave, it is trapped. It was a good answer. It was true in its way. It was the answer of a boy who wanted to sound older and sadder than he was, and the lion had told him not to reach for the answer he thought they wished to hear, and the clever, sad answer was exactly that. It was performance. It was a small boy showing a large old thing how much pain he could carry like a trophy. So he put it down. And under it, where he did not like to look, was the real answer, and the real answer cost him, and he gave it anyway, because the broom was wedged in the door behind him, and he had not come all this way to lie at the last step. It's worth more, Harry said. His voice was steady and very quiet. Not less, more. A boy who's safe can afford to be brave. If it goes wrong, he goes home, and home is still there. He's risking the top of his life. A boy who's never been safe is risking the bottom of his. When I do something brave, when I take a book they told me not to read, when I say the true thing instead of the thing that keeps me fed, I'm not risking the top of anything. I'm risking the floor. There's nothing under me to catch me, so it costs me everything every time, and I do it anyway. He stopped. The chamber rang with the not quite silence of an enormous thing holding its breath. That's what it's worth. It's worth more because I can't afford it, and I spend it anyway. He had not meant to say so much. He had given it the floor of his life, the thing he never showed, and now it had been said in the dark to a carved lion and could not be taken back, and the old fear came up. They've seen it now they'll take it, and he stood and let the fear come and did not run. The lion's jaws closed. For a long moment nothing happened, and Harry thought with a strange calm that he had failed, that he had given the truest thing he owned and it had not been enough, and that he would climb 211 steps to a plaster wall and spend the rest of his life knowing exactly what he had lost. He found he could bear even that. He had said the true thing. That had to be worth the floor he had spent on it. Then the iron bands on the door began to turn from black to white. It started at the lion's heart and spread outward along the metal, the ancient black bleeding away to the pale gleam of new iron, and where the metal brightened it sang, a single clear sustained note that was nothing like the note in his teeth from the cupboard wall. That had been a question, and this was an answer, and the answer was yes. Braided voices came back, and now all 4 of them spoke at once, and under the warm, rough lion voice he heard the others for the first time as distinct. A cool, clear one like a struck glass, a deep, slow one like turned earth, and a soft, low one that gave away nothing and missed nothing. It knows your blood, said the cool, clear voice, and there was wonder in it, old, cold wonder. We wondered when one would come who carried all 4 threads, thin, so thin after so long, but there, the lion, the eagle, the badger, the serpent, all 4 worn down the centuries into one small, unfed boy in a cupboard. You are not uncalled after all, said the deep, slow earth voice, and it was the kindest thing anyone had said to Harry in living memory, and he had to set his jaw against it. You were called before you were born. You are only late. The door swung in. It did not creak. A door that has been shut for 400 years should creak, and this one opened in perfect silence on perfect balance, swinging back into a hall where the gold light pooled thicker, where shapes stood in rows, racks, he thought, or cases, or the shadows of furniture too far to read. And from somewhere in that hall came a draught of air that was not cold at all but warm, warm and dry and smelling of old paper and older iron, the smell of a place that had been kept, not abandoned. Kept against exactly this hour. Harry did not move toward it yet. He had one more thing to do, and he did it because he had decided in the first 9 days that he would never again pass through a door without knowing whether it would let him back. He turned and looked up the stair, 211 steps to the small bright wedge where Petunia's broom held the cupboard open, and he fixed it, gave it a shelf in the room in his head, the way home. Then he turned back to the open hall. What is this place really? He said. Not the school, the thing under the school, the voice. Who are you? The 4 voices folded back into their braid, and the braid answered, and the answer was the last thing the warden gave him before he stepped through, and it would take him a long time to understand all of what it meant. We are what the 4 made to keep, what the 4 feared to lose, the warden said. We are the promise they left against the day the world above would forget on purpose. They did not bury this place, boy. Remember that whatever you are told, we were hidden. There is a difference, and the difference is the whole of why you are here. The light in the hall brightened, beckoning, Geo in. The first seal is broken, the others will not come so cheaply. Harry stepped over the threshold of the Lion's Hall. The hall went on far longer than a hall under a house had any right to. Down its length stood the racks he had half seen from the rotunda, and they were not cases of books, as he had expected of a school. They held weapons. Swords, mostly hundreds of them, hung point down in iron cradles, and spears, and things he had no names for, and none of them was decoration. He could tell decoration from use the way he could tell a real smile from petunias, and every blade here had the plain, unbeautiful look of a tool meant to be picked up. When he stepped close to the nearest sword, a short, broad blade with a grip worn pale, he saw that it was not steel. The metal was dark and faintly lit from within, and along its edge ran the sliding script, and the longer he looked the more certain he became that the words were the blade, that someone had written a sentence so hard and so true it had become an edge you could cut with. The edged word, he said, trying the Founder's name for it against the thing itself, and the thing itself agreed. The script along the blade brightened when he said it, the way a dog's ears lift at its name. He did not touch it. He had no intention of touching anything in this hall until he understood what touching it would do. Instead, he walked the length of the racks, reading what he could, building shelves in his head as fast as he could fill them, and the hall obliged him, the gold light thickening ahead and thinning behind so that he always stood in a moving pool of it, as if the place were turning its single lamp to follow the one student it had left. He was perhaps 100 paces in when he noticed that he had a shadow again. The rotunda had taken his, and here it was returned, thrown long and thin across the pale floor by the gold light at his back. He was glad of it for exactly as long as it took him to realize that it was not his. It stood between two of the weapon racks, a man's shadow with no man to cast it, tall and slightly stooped, and it was reading the blades as he was, head tilted, and when Harry stopped it stopped, and the two of them regarded each other across the hall, the boy with his shadow and the shadow with no boy. "You're not mine," Harry said, and kept his voice level though his pulse had jumped. "I lost mine on the stairs." The shadow seemed to consider this. Then it lifted one long arm and pointed, not at Harry, but past him, deeper in, the gesture of a guide rather than a threat, and a voice came out of the air near it, dry as turning pages, with the amused weariness of a man who has waited a great while to say something and means to enjoy it. "You'll lose more than your shadow down here, boy, if you go grabbing at edges before you've been taught to hold them." That one, a flicker indicating the short, broad blade he had nearly touched, belonged to a woman who cut a duke's binding spell in half at a battle you've never heard of, and it doesn't much care whose hand picks it up. It'll take the hand. Now, are you the one the stones have been muttering about, or have I finally, after 4 centuries, gone properly mad? Harry looked at the shadow without a body in a hall of living swords under a house in Surrey, and found that he was not, in fact, afraid, that the part of him that should have been afraid was busy instead cataloguing. "I'm Harry," he said, "and I think I'm the one they've been muttering about. The voice in the rotunda called me keeper. It said I was called before I was born, and I'm only late." He paused. "Who are you, and where's the rest of you?" A sound came out of the air that took him a moment to place as laughter, rusty, surprised, the laughter of a thing that had forgotten it could. "Osric," the shadow said, "underkeeper of this place in life and its only company in death, which has been a great deal longer and considerably less well paid. As to the rest of me," the shadow spread its arms, rueful, "I gave my shadow to the wards a long age ago to keep them awake while everything else slept. A man can get by without a shadow. It's the one part of you nobody misses." The amusement thinned. "I'll tell you the long of it later if you live to want it. For now, don't touch the blades, don't open the spiral doors, and for the love of every founder, don't eat anything Nib offers you until you've asked it twice what's in it. Nib." Down the hall, low to the floor, something moved, a quick small shape that ducked behind a weapon rack the instant Harry's eyes found it, but not before he saw it. Knee-high, knobble-jointed, with great lamp-bright eyes and one ear notched clean through, as though something had once bitten it and the bite had healed crooked. A house elf, his Too Easy books would have called it, except that his Too Easy books had never mentioned that a house elf could look at a boy with such naked, careful hope, as if the boy were the first new thing it had seen in longer than it could count. "That's Nib," Osric said. "Left behind when the rest fled, same as me, except Nib's got the better excuse. Nib never left because Nib was waiting. Weren't you?" he added, to the rack the elf had vanished behind, not unkindly. "For the keeper," said a small cracked voice from behind the rack, and then in a rush, peering out with both ears trembling. "Is you him? Is you really him? Nib has kept the lamps, and Nib has kept the loam, and Nib has waited, and the bad men never found the door, and Nib never told, and is you him?" Harry knelt slowly, the way you do for a frightened animal, and met the lamp-bright eyes on their level. He did not know yet what a keeper was or what it would cost him to be one. But he knew what it was to wait in the dark for someone who never came, and he was not going to be the person who, having finally arrived, looked away. I don't know everything I am yet, he said, but yes, I'm the one who opened the door. I'm going to keep opening them, and I'm not going to leave. He looked from the elf to the shadow and back. Either of you, the lamp bright eyes filled. The small shape came out from behind the rack, and the shadow with no body bowed, low and creaking, the bow of a servant to a master 400 years too late. Far away and far above, in a room that was nothing like the rotunda, and yet, in its bones, the very same kind of room, a room built to keep things from being known, a needle moved. It was a slender needle of blackened silver, balanced on a pivot finer than a hair, suspended over a disk of gray glass in which floated a map of the island of Britain rendered not in coastlines but in wards, in the old bindings that lie under the country, the way roots lie under a wood. The needle had not moved in the working lifetime of the man who watched it. 3 men before him had watched it and recorded faithfully that it had not moved, and gone to their graves having watched a needle do nothing, which was, the office considered, the highest form of service, to guard a silence so complete that nothing ever disturbed it. The needle trembled. Then it swung a degree 2, 3 and settled, pointing south and a little east, toward the soft green sprawl of Surrey, and held there, quivering very slightly, the way a compass quivers when it has finally, after long confusion, found the pole. The man who watched it was named Aldous Vane, and he held the title of Provost of the Office of Educational Standards, which sounded like the dullest office in the wizarding world and was, in truth, the oldest and the most carefully disguised. He was not a young man and not yet an old one. He had the kind of face that committees trust, even featured, unhurried, the face of a man who has never in his life raised his voice because he has never in his life needed to. He set down his tea. He looked at the needle for a long time without touching it, because Vane had learned over a long and quiet career that the first response to any disturbance should be to do nothing visible, and a great deal that was not. 406 years, he said to the empty room in the tone of a man noting a change in the weather. And it picks a Tuesday. He did not panic. Panic was for people who did not understand the systems they served, and Vane understood his system as a surgeon understands a body. The needle moving meant one thing and only one thing, the thing the office had existed in unbroken succession to make sure never happened. A seal had broken. The buried curriculum had stirred. Somewhere in Surrey, under a green and ordinary sky, a door that the Founders' heirs had spent 4 centuries, and an unspeakable amount of money convincing the world had never existed had, on a Tuesday, opened. Vane crossed a cabinet, unlocked it with a touch and a word, and took from it a slim book bound in gray, the register of the office, in which were recorded, in the hands of dozens of dead provosts, every contingency the Founders' heirs had imagined when they built their long, profitable silence. He turned to a page he had read once as a younger man on the day he took the post and had hoped, the way one hopes about a clause in a will, never to need. He read it again now. His even face did not change, but his thumb pressed flat against the page over a single line written in a hand 3 centuries gone, and the line said, "Should the Underschool wake, it will wake to keeper, for it wakes to nothing less. Find the keeper, the rest follows." "Well," said Aldous Vane very softly to the needle, to the grey book, to 400 years of careful dark, "let us go and see who has been spending courage they cannot afford." He closed the book. He did not yet know it was a boy. He did not yet know the boy's name, but he knew, with the cold certainty of a man whose whole life had been built on a secret, that somewhere to the south the secret had a crack in it now, and that cracks, left alone, became chasms, and that everything he was, everything the office was, everything it owned and sold and withheld, depended on his reaching that crack before the boy on the other side of it learned what the silence had been hiding. Below Surrey, in the warm and waiting dark, Harry Potter knelt between a shadow and a one-eared elf at the threshold of a hall full of living swords, and began, without yet knowing it, to learn. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2, the Founders' Magic Harry came back 9 nights later, the next time the house forgot him, and he came back with a list. He had written nothing down. Writing things down was for people who could afford to be found out. The list lived in the room behind his eyes, on a fresh shelf he had built between the chart of the cupboard wall and the map of the stairs, and it had 11 items on it, and the first item was, "Find out whether the door opens for me, or only for being forgotten." The Dursleys had not gone away again. But Vernon had taken to a Tuesday night meeting of men who admired their own importance, and Petunia went to bed with the wireless and a glass of something she pretended was for her nerves, and Dudley slept like a felled tree, and on the second Tuesday Harry sat in the dark cupboard and made the house forget him on purpose, sat so still and thought so small that he became, by an act of will he did not yet have a name for, not worth anyone's attention. The seam came up gold. He had his answer to item 1 before he had finished asking it. The door did not open for an empty house. It opened for him being unseen, and he could be unseen in a full one if he tried. He went down the 211 steps and did not count them this time, which told him something about himself he set aside to look at later, that a thing counted once truly did not need counting again. Osric was waiting in the rotunda, his shadow shape leaning against nothing at the mouth of the Lion's Hall, and the first thing the dead underkeeper said was not hello. You came back, Osric said. I owe Nib a wager. Nib said you would. I said the ones who come back are the ones who have nowhere worse to be, and that you'd weigh it like a sum and decide the door wasn't worth the risk. A dry sound. Nib knows boys better than I do. I only ever taught them. You taught here. Harry looked down the 4 halls, each a throat of dark with its single far door bright at the end. Taught what? You said you'd tell me the long of it if I lived to want it. I lived, I want it. The shadow was quiet a moment. Then it pushed off from the nothing it leaned on and walked. It walked, a shadow walking, sliding along the pale floor toward the center of the rotunda where the 4 arcs met, and Harry followed. And Nib appeared from somewhere with a stool that was 400 years too grand for a boy, carved with lions and eagles, and set it down and looked up with both ears trembling until Harry sat on it, and only then did the elf go still. This place has a name, Osric said. The world above forgot it on purpose, but a thing's name doesn't die just because liars stop saying it. It is the Underschool, the Quartus Vault in the Charters. The 4 of them built it under the first stone of Hogwarts, before there was a Hogwarts to be under, the way you build the cellar before you build the house. A pause. You've been taught, what have you been taught of the 4? That there were 4 founders. Harry kept his voice flat, careful not to let the wanting show. Gryffindor, Ravenclaw, Hufflepuff, Slytherin, that they built a school, that they fell out. The library books are for children, they don't say much. The library books, Osric said, are exactly as much as you were meant to know, which is the first thing you should find suspicious. No, listen, they built a school above for everyone, bright, open, a school the whole island could send its children to and trust. And they built this below for the ones the bright school made, the ones who finished it and were hungry still. Up there they taught the alphabet of magic. Down here they taught the 4 tongues you spell with once you have it. The shadow turned, and though it had no face, Harry felt it looking at him. 4 disciplines, one from each of them, the truest thing each of them knew. And every one of them is sealed behind a door in that spiral, and every one of them the world above will tell you, if it tells you anything at all, was lost, or dangerous, or dark. And it was. It was dangerous, Osric said. Don't let me sell you a clean story, you'll know it for a lie and stop trusting the rest. It was dangerous the way a blade is dangerous, or fire, or the truth. The question is never whether a thing is dangerous, boy. It's who decided you weren't to have it, and what they were keeping for themselves while they decided. Harry sat very still on the lion-carved stool. This was the shape of a thing he had felt the edge of his whole life without having the words for it, that the people who told you what you could not have were almost always the people who had it. Petunia locking the larder, the librarian with her shelf of grown-up books. He had thought it was about him. It had never been about him. It was about the lock. Name them, he said, the 4. The arcs in the floor warmed under Nib's bare feet, and Osric named them, and as he named each one, the far door at the end of its hall pulsed once, gold in acknowledgement. Gryffindor S is the one you opened, the Lion's Hall, the one you're sitting nearest. We called it the Edged Word, Cor Ferrum in the Charters, the Iron Heart. It is the magic of will and the blade of courage made into a force you can aim. A wizard who has it does not need a wand to fight and does not fear a man who has one. That alone should tell you why they buried it. A peasant who knows the Edged Word is a peasant a baron cannot afford to anger. The lion's door glowed and dimmed. Ravenclaw S is the Eagle's Hall across from you. The far door opposite pulsed cool, the unwritten tongue, lingua tacita. The magic of true names and of structure, of seeing a spell the way a clockmaker sees a clock, every gear of it laid bare so that you can read it and break it and write your own. With it you can take apart any working any wizard has ever laid, including the ones the powerful rely on to stay powerful. You understand why that one frightened them. They'd have to teach everyone to read the locks, Harry said slowly, to teach anyone, and then everyone could pick them. Now you're learning. A warmth in the dry voice quickly gone. Hufflepuff's hall is there to your left. The deep door pulsed slow like a heartbeat. The deep loam, Radix. The world thinks Hufflepuff's the soft one, the cooks and the diggers and the kind ones. The world is a fool. The deep loam is the magic of growing and healing and binding, yes, and it is also the most dangerous discipline of the 4, and it is the one they sealed the deepest, and I'll tell you why when you've earned the hearing of it and not before. The door dimmed before Harry could press, and Slytherin S on your right, the hidden hand, occultatio, the art of the unseen, of secrecy, of wards, of bending where a man's attention falls, the serpent's own. The ones who sealed this place kept a cut-down, crippled version of that one for themselves and threw the rest down here with the others. The lock that locked the door, you might say, was filed from the same iron as what's behind it. 4 disciplines. Harry held them in the room behind his eyes and turned them, and a pattern surfaced, the way patterns did when you had enough of them. They're not 4 random arts, he said. They're a set, the blade so you can fight whoever locked the door, the reading so you can pick the lock, the growing so you can undo whatever the lock cost you, and the hiding so you can do all 3 without being caught. He looked up at the shadow. It's not a curriculum, it's an escape. The rotunda was silent for a long moment. Nib had gone absolutely still, both ears flat. In 400 years, Osric said at last, very quietly, you are the first to see that in the first hour. The others took months, some took years. One never saw it at all, and he was the cleverest of the lot, and it killed him in the end, the not seeing. The shadow straightened. Yes, that is what it is. The founders built the bright school to teach the island magic. And they built this to teach the island, if the island ever needed it, how to take its magic back from whoever stole it. They did not name an enemy. They were too wise to name an enemy 400 years before he was born. They named a danger and built the answer to it and sealed the answer where only the right hand could reach. Your hand, as it happens. Why my hand? Because the lock reads blood, and your blood is the only blood left in Britain that runs all 4 ways at once. The shadow lifted, a shrug without shoulders. Don't make it grander than it is. It isn't destiny. It's arithmetic. 4 lines, thinned by 400 years of marriage and death and forgetting, braided down at last into one boy who happened to be raised so far from the world that the world's locks never got a chance to teach him he couldn't pick them. If they'd raised you kind, you'd never have noticed the cold in the wall. Cruelty made you watchful. Watchful found the door. Eat, and the dry voice softened by a degree Harry almost missed. I'm not telling you the cupboard was a gift. I'm telling you that you turned it into one, which is a different thing and the more impressive of the two. Harry did not answer that. He had a rule about kindness, which was that he examined it the way he examined everything, because kindness in his experience was a setup more often than it was a gift, and he turned Osric's over and found to his unease that it did not seem to be a setup. He set the unease on a shelf and changed the subject because the subject was him and he did not like to leave it standing in the open. Teach me the first one, he said. The edged word. I don't have a wand. Good, Osric said. Wands are for people who have been taught they need one. Half of what the bright school teaches is the need for a wand, and they teach it first before the child can ask why, so that the need feels like a law of nature instead of a thing somebody sold them. The edged word doesn't care about wands. It was old before wands. Come. The lesson took place in the Lion's Hall among the racks of living swords, and it was nothing like what Harry had imagined a magic lesson would be, which was the first useful thing it taught him. Osric did not hand him a blade. Osric made him stand in the center of the hall with his arms at his sides and asked him a question. What is a sword? A length of metal with an edge. That's a butcher's answer. Try again, Harry thought. He had learned in 8 years of being asked questions designed to trap him that the first answer was almost never the one being asked for, and that the trick was to find what the questioner could see that you couldn't yet. A decision, he said slowly. A sword is a length of metal that's already decided. It's been ground down to one intention. It can only do the thing it's shaped for. That's why it works. It's not trying to be anything else. The shadow went still in a way Harry was beginning to recognize as approval. The edged word, Osric said, is the art of doing to a thought what the smith does to iron. You take a thing you want to push, to ward, to cut, to hold, and you grind it down. You burn off every other want. You heat it in the one intention until there's nothing left of you in the moment but that single edge. And then it is true the way a sword is true, and the world steps back from it the way flesh steps back from steel. Shadow drifted closer. Most wizards never learn this because most wizards are never made to choose. They have wands, the wand holds the shape for them. They can be muddled and frightened and full of 17 wants at once, and the wand sorts it out. You don't have a wand, you have something better and harder. You have a boy who has spent his whole life burning everything off himself that might get him noticed. You already know how to be only one thing. You've been doing it at that kitchen counter for years. Now do it on purpose and aim it. He had Harry start with the simplest edge there was, a push, not against a person, against a single dead leaf, dry as paper, that Nib produced from somewhere and set on the pale floor 3 feet away. Move it, Osric said, not with your hand, with the one intention. Want it moved more than you have ever wanted anything, and want nothing else, and let the wanting have an edge. Harry looked at the leaf. His first attempt did nothing, because his first attempt was a child's attempt, a scrunching of the face, a holding of the breath, a vague, hot wish. The leaf lay there. He understood at once that he had done it wrong, that he had wanted in the muddled human way, with hope and effort, and a small, frightened part of him already braced to fail and have it confirm what the Dursleys said, that he was a useless boy who couldn't do anything right. That frightened part was a second want, and a third, and a fourth, and the edged word did not work on a fistful of wants. It worked on one. He closed his eyes. He did the thing he did at the counter, the burning off. He let the fear go, not by fighting it, but by deciding it was not relevant, the way he decided the third stair was not to be stepped on. He let the hope go, because hope was just fear wearing a coat. He let go of the part that wanted Osric to be impressed, and the part that wanted to prove the Dursleys wrong, and the part that was already, even now, thinking about how he would describe this later to no one, because he had no one to describe things to. He burned all of it off until there was nothing in him but the leaf and the word for moving it, and the word was not a word at all but a direction, a single ground edge of pure intention, and he opened his eyes and put it on the leaf. The leaf did not slide. It leapt, shot across the floor, and struck the base of a weapon rack and pinned there, flat, as though a wind had nailed it. The cost arrived a half-second later. It came up through him like the ache after you've lifted something too heavy, except the ache was behind his eyes and in the hollow of his chest, a scooped-out tiredness, and he swayed and caught himself and did not fall, because falling was a thing that got you noticed, and he did not fall in front of people even when the people were dead. That, Osric said, should not be possible at 8 on the first night without a wand. The dry voice had lost its dryness. I have watched grown men sweat for a fortnight to do what you just did, frightened and starving in a borrowed pair of someone else's shoes. Do you understand what I'm telling you? That I'm strong, Harry said. He said it without pride, the way he stated facts. Or that it costs more than you let on, and I just paid a fortnight's worth in one go, and I'll feel it tomorrow. Both, said Osric. Both are true, and the second is why you'll stop now, tonight, and not do it again until I say. Power that doesn't know its own cost is just a faster way to die. The bright school would have you cast 100 times a day from a wand that bleeds off the price so gently you never learn there is one. Down here we make you pay in coin you can feel, because a keeper who can't feel the cost of his own magic is a keeper who'll spend himself to nothing the first time it matters. The shadow turned toward the rotunda. You're done. Eat what Nib brings you. Yes, it's safe. I was joking about the asking twice, mostly, and go home and sleep. And don't you dare push so much as a feather until the next time the wall lets you in. Harry wanted to argue. The hunger to do it again, to feel that edge come true a second time, was the strongest thing he had felt in years, stronger than hunger for food, and that frightened him more than the cost had, because he knew what it was to be ruled by a want. He had watched Vernon be ruled by wants his whole life and despised it. So he did the hard thing, which was the thing the lesson had just taught him. He burned the want off. He decided it was not relevant tonight. He stood up from the lion-carved stool. All right, he said, next time. And that, Osric would tell Nib later, was the moment he stopped doubting the boy, because a child who could walk away from his first taste of power on the first night was a child who might, just possibly, survive having it. Nib brought him food at the top of the stairs. It was not archive food, whatever that would have been. It was a wedge of bread and a hunk of hard yellow cheese and 3 apples, wrapped in a clean cloth, and Harry understood without being told that the elf had got it from somewhere above, that Nib had ways out of the archive that the door did not know about, and that the elf had used them to bring food to a boy it had met once. He took it because refusing it would have hurt the elf more than the pride it cost him to accept, and that arithmetic, at least, he had no trouble with. Nib will leave food, the elf said, twisting its hands. When Harry Potter cannot come down, Nib will leave food where the wall is thin. Nib has watched the house. Nib knows the cupboard. Nib knows they does not feed him proper. The lamp-bright eyes came up, fierce all of a sudden. It is not right. A keeper should not be hungry. Nib will fix it. Nib can be small and quiet, and they will never see. Can't let them see you, Harry said, sharp with a fear that surprised him by being for the elf and not for himself. If they catch you, if they find any of this, they will not catch Nib. And there was something in the cracked old voice then, under the eagerness, that reminded Harry the creature had waited 400 years in the dark without being caught and had its own competence and did not need an 8-year-old to teach it caution. Nib has hidden from worse than fat men. Eat keeper and come back. He ate the bread on the stairs and the cheese in the cupboard and saved the apples on the shelf behind the tins where Petunia never looked, and he slept. And in the morning the cost came due exactly as Osric had promised, a headache behind the eyes, a shakiness in the hands, a tiredness that no amount of sleep had touched. He cooked the bacon anyway. He buttered the toast to the edges. He became furniture, and the furniture had a secret now, and the secret was a leaf nailed to the base of a rack by nothing but a boy's single perfect want, and he carried it through the whole gray ordinary day like a coal he'd swallowed, and no one saw it because no one ever saw him, and for the first time in his life that was the best thing about him. The edged word changed how he moved through the house, and he had to be careful that it didn't. For the first time in 8 years he caught himself, on a Thursday, wanting to use it. Vernon had said the thing he said, the thing about Harry's parents being layabouts who got what was coming to them, and Harry felt the edge rise in him unbidden, ground and ready, and understood that he could put it on the man across the table as easily as he had put it on the leaf, and that the man across the table had no idea such a thing was possible, and therefore had no defense against it at all. He held the edge in his hand under the table and looked at his uncle and did the hardest piece of the edged word, which was not the casting but the not casting, the burning off of a want that was entirely justified. He let it go. Not because Vernon deserved mercy, Vernon deserved nothing, but because a boy who spent his first weeks of power settling scores at a kitchen table would be a boy who had learned the casting and missed the whole point of the not casting, and Osric had told him the not casting was where the discipline actually lived. He told Osric about it the next night because he told Osric most things now, which was itself a thing he examined and could not explain. Good, the dead man said when he'd heard it. That was the real lesson, and you taught it to yourself, which is the only way it ever takes. The edged word in a furious hand is just a faster fist. The founders didn't bury it because it could hurt people. Every art can hurt people. They buried it for worse reasons, and you'll have the whole of those reasons in time. But the man who first learned to ground a want to an edge, Gryffindor himself, is supposed to have said that the bravest thing the blade ever does is stay sheathed when every reason in the world says draw it. Keep teaching yourself that and you'll be a swordsman. Forget it and you'll just be a sharp boy in a kitchen, and the world's full of those and they all end the same way. The lessons went on like that through the late winter and into the spring, 11 of them 12, each one bought with a night the house forgot him and paid for with a morning of cost, and by the end of them Harry could do more than move a leaf. He could hold a door against Nib's small, determined shoving. He could put out a candle from across the rotunda without a breath. Once near the end, he ground his want down to so fine and true an edge that he made a hairline crack run the length of a slab of practice stone Osric had grudgingly let him try, and the cost of that one put him in the cupboard for a day and a half pretending to be ill, which the Dursleys believed because the Dursleys believed any explanation that excused them from looking at him closely. He learned the principle, which mattered more than any single thing he could do with it. He learned that all 4 disciplines, Osric said, rested on the same root the edged word taught. That magic answered to a mind that knew exactly what it wanted and had burned off everything it didn't. The edged word was that root made into a weapon. The other 3 would be the same root made into other shapes, a key, a hand, a healing, and a wizard who truly had the first would learn the others faster, the way a child who has learned one language learns the second in half the time. 300 miles away in a world sideways, in a room with no windows beneath the oldest part of the Ministry of Magic, Aldous Vane convened a meeting that did not appear on any schedule and whose minutes would be taken by no quill. The room was called, in the few documents that admitted it existed, the Lyceum. The Office of Educational Standards met there twice a year to do the dull visible work of an office that set examinations and licensed instructors and decided, with a great show of careful neutrality, which texts were suitable for which years. That work was real. It was also a coat, worn over a body that had not changed its true shape in 400 years, and the body was called by the 7 people in the world who knew its name, the curators. They were 7 now. There had been more once when there was more to do. Vane sat at the head of the long table, and to his right sat a woman named Ostrander who oversaw what St. Mungo's was permitted to teach its healers, and more to the point, what it was not, and beyond her a man named Quill who held the registry of licensed wand-makers and the older, secret registry of disciplines a wand-maker might not lawfully serve. The others Harry would not learn the names of for some time. They had in common a quality Vane prized above loyalty, which was incuriosity about everything outside their own portion of the secret. A curator who wondered too much about the whole was a curator who became a liability. The office had a clean way of retiring liabilities. It involved a great deal of paperwork and a very small amount of memory. The Southern Needle has moved, Vane said without preamble. He did not raise his voice. He never raised his voice. 106 years it sat still. On Tuesday last it found a bearing, Surrey. Ostrander set down her cup. Moved how far? A seal, said Vane. One, the instrument cannot tell me which, only that the lattice took a wound and is now bleeding very slightly into the southeast. 1 seal of the 4, which means someone has opened the first door of the Quartus vault, which means the vault has done what we have spent 4 centuries and the better part of 3 fortunes ensuring it would never do. He let that sit. It has found a keeper. Quill made a sound, quickly stifled. The others were better trained, but Vane watched the temperature of the room drop a degree and was satisfied because fear in this room was a tool and he was the only one permitted to be unafraid. It cannot have found a keeper, Ostrander said. The lines are extinct. We attended to that. The curators have attended to it in every generation. There is no living blood that, there is a living blood, Vane said, or the needle would not have moved because the door does not open for the curious, the brave, or the lucky. It opens for one thing only, so let us not waste an hour we do not have insisting on the impossibility of the thing the instrument has already measured. He turned a page in the gray register, though he did not need to read it, he had it by heart. Somewhere in Surrey there is a child, it will be a child. It is always a child the first time, the vault prefers them unmade, who has begun to learn what we have spent the wealth and the labor of 400 years convincing the world was lost. And every night that child remains in that vault it learns more. The edged word first, if it opened the lion's door, then it will want the eagle S, and if it ever reaches the badger S, he did not finish. He did not need to. Ostrander had gone the color of the table. What do we do? Said Quill. We do what we have always done, Vane said. We find it and we close it and we make certain the silence holds, but carefully, quietly. We cannot move openly because to move openly is to admit the vault exists, and the whole of our work for 400 years has been to ensure that no one, not the Wisengamot, not the Aurors, not the headmaster of that bright and useless school above the vault, so much as suspects there is anything to admit. The instant the world believes there is buried magic to be had, every fool and faction in Britain will start digging, and some of them will dig in the right place. He closed the register. So we do not send Aurors, we send a finder. The temperature of the room dropped another degree because they knew which finder. He is expensive, Ostrander said. He is appropriate, said Vane. He works in the same coin the 7th discipline is filed from the cut-down hand we kept. He can quarter a county and never be seen quartering it. He can stand in a child's bedroom and the child's mother will offer him tea and forget him before the cup is empty. He will find the door and he will find the child and he will report to me, and only to me, and then I will decide what closing the door requires. Vane rose. The meeting, such as it was over. It had only ever needed one decision, and he had made it before he walked in, as he made all his decisions in private in advance, so that the room only ever watched him perform a certainty he already owned. Until I decide, none of you will act, none of you will speak of this beyond this room. And none of you, Ostrander, this is for you, will so much as adjust a curriculum or recall a text, because a sudden tightening of the silence is itself a sound, and the one thing we cannot afford is to teach the child, by our own caution, that there is something worth being cautious about. He left them in the windowless room with the cold settling into their good robes, and went up alone through the sleeping ministry, and on his way he passed the great atrium with its fountain of golden statues, the noble wizard, the grateful goblin, the adoring elf, the centaur, the whole lie of it cast in metal and lit from below, and he stopped, as he sometimes did, and looked at it, because it pleased him to look at the purest thing his office had ever made. Not a building, not a law, a story. The story that magic was a gift handed down from the wise above to the grateful below, and that the below should be content with what it was given and never, ever ask what the wise had kept. 400 years that story had held. It had made the curators rich beyond the dreams of the kings they had outlived. And now a child in Surrey, who did not yet know any of their names, had cracked the first stone of it, and Aldous Vane stood before the golden fountain in the empty dark and felt, for the first time in his long and even-tempered life, the small cold flicker of a man who has just been told the silence is not as deep as he had spent his whole life believing. He found he did not dislike it. A man who has guarded a thing too long forgets why it was worth guarding. The flicker reminded him. It would, he thought, be almost a pleasure to bury this one properly. He went home and slept the sleep of a man who has made the only decision that mattered, and the next morning he sent for the Grey Man. Harry did not know any of that. What he knew was that he had earned the right to ask the question he had been not asking for weeks, and he asked it on the 12th night, sitting on the lion-carved stool with the day and a half cost finally faded from behind his eyes, and he asked it plainly because he had decided he was done circling it. You keep saying the Badger's Hall is the deepest sealed and the most dangerous, and you'll tell me why when I've earned it. I've earned the edged word. Tell me why they buried this place, not the danger story. The real one who sealed it, and what did they get for it? The shadow was quiet for a long moment, and Nib by the wall went very still. I can't, Osric said at last, and it was not a refusal. Harry could hear that. It was something closer to grief. Not because you haven't earned the hearing of it, because I don't have the whole of it to give. I was an underkeeper, boy. I kept the lamps and the locks and the records of who came and went, and one day men came who were not supposed to come, and there was a fight I didn't understand and couldn't stop, and when it was over the doors were sealed and the Founder's own intelligence had gone silent in the walls, and everyone who knew the why of it was dead or fled or like me, too late and too small to do anything but give my shadow to the wards and wait. I have the shape of it. I don't have the heart of it. The heart of it is written in the second hall, the eagle S, the unwritten tongue, because of course it is. That's the hall that teaches you to read the things the powerful would rather you couldn't. The record of what was done to this place and by whom and why is kept in the one discipline they most needed buried. They sealed the explanation behind the very skill you need to read it, a dry, mirthless sound. Whoever did this was not a fool, Harry, remember that. Everything about how this was done was clever. The danger was never that they were stupid. The danger is that they were patient and rich and exactly as intelligent as you are, and they had a 400-year head start. Then open the Eagle's Hall, Harry said. Test me on it. I want to read what they buried. The Eagle's door does not open for the curious, Osric said. I told you that at the start, and you thought it was a riddle. It is. The first door, the Lion S, open to your blood and your courage because the edged word is a thing you can want your way into. The second is different. The second hall belongs to a mind that built memory palaces you could walk through, and it does not open to a boy who wants to read a secret. It opens to a keeper, to one the whole vault has named, not just one door, and the vault has not named you yet, it has only let you in. There's a difference, and the difference is the next door, and the next door is not the Eagle S. The shadow turned toward the center of the rotunda, where the four arcs met in a disk of dull dark metal Harry had taken for decoration. It's that one, the warden's own. Before any more halls open to you, the thing in the walls has to decide what you are, not whether your blood fits a lock, whether you're fit to hold the whole. Harry looked at the disc in the floor, and for the first time since the night he had felt the cold in the wall. Something in him that was not fear and was not hunger stirred, a kind of vertigo, the sense of standing at the lip of a thing much larger than the leaf he had nailed to a rack, much larger than a boy. And if it decides I'm not fit, then it does to you what it should have done to the ones who sealed it, Osric said, if it had been awake enough to stop them. It is a very old, very tired, very angry intelligence, Harry, and it has spent 400 years with no one to be angry at, and now there is a small live thing walking its halls with all four threads in its blood, and it has to decide whether you are the answer it was built to wait for, or just the next clever hand reaching for a thing it was told it couldn't have. The shadow's voice dropped. I'd not rush it, but I'd not run from it either. It can smell a coward through 400 years of stone, and the one thing the edged word ought to have taught you is that the only safe way past a thing that smells fear is to walk up to it and not be afraid. Harry sat on the stool carved with lions and eagles in the heart of a buried school, with a leaf nailing want ground sharp behind his eyes and a headache he'd earned, and an elf who fed him and a dead man who had, against all his rules, started to matter to him, and he looked at the disc in the floor where an old angry god of a thing was waiting to weigh him, and he did the arithmetic, and the arithmetic came out the way it always did. There was nothing under him to catch him. There never had been. He spent the floor of his life every time anyway. Then wake it, he said. Tell the warden I'll stand the test whenever it likes. Above him, in the world that had spent 400 years deciding what he was allowed to know, a gray and forgettable man stepped off a train into the soft green ordinariness of Surrey and began, very quietly, to look for a door. Chapter 2 and Chapter 3. Keeper of the Archive, the warden woke the disc in the floor on a night in early April, and it did not look like waking. Harry had expected light. He had grown used to the archive announcing itself in gold, the seam, the arcs, the doors. But when the thing in the walls finally turned its full attention on him, the rotunda went dark instead, the gold draining out of the air until he stood in a black so complete it pressed on the eyes, and the only thing he could feel was the cold disc under his bare feet and the sense, sudden and total, of being looked at by something that filled the chamber the way water fills a jar. It does not need light to see you, Osric's voice said from somewhere that no longer had a where. Light was for your comfort. Comfort is done now, stand still and answer true, and remember, it is not your enemy. It is only very tired and very thorough, and it has waited a long time to be sure. Then Osric was gone too, his voice cut off, and Harry was alone in the dark with the warden, and the warden spoke, and it did not speak in the braid of four he had grown used to. It spoke as one voice now, deep and layered and entirely without warmth, the voice of a thing that had stopped being four people and become a single purpose a long time ago. You ask to be WIGHED, it said. Few ask, most are brought. It will not be gentle. Do you withdraw the asking? No, Harry said. Good. The dark shifted, and Harry had the sense of an enormous mind turning toward him like a face. I will show you three things. Each will offer you something. You will take it or leave it. There is no correct choice written anywhere for you to guess. Clever boy, so do not waste the dark trying to read me. I am not a lock, I am a judge. Show me what you are when no answer is safe. The first thing came. Dark in front of him resolved not into light, but into a kind of seeing that did not need it, and Harry was looking at the kitchen of number 4 Privet Drive, rendered perfect and silent and still, every detail of it true, down to the chip in the rim of Vernon's favorite mug and the grease shadow on the wall behind the cooker that no scrubbing ever quite lifted. And in the kitchen, frozen mid-motion, were the three of them. Vernon purpling, Petunia mouth open on a word, Dudley fist raised. Adore, the warden said, and the word was an offer. I can give you the edged word tonight, not the student's portion you have EARNED, but the whole of it, made, finished, a man's mastery in a child's hand. You would walk up the stair and through that kitchen, and no one in it would ever raise a hand or a voice to you again, because you would be the edge in the room, and flesh steps back from steel. I can give it to you now. You have only to take it. The frozen kitchen waited. Answer with your hand, not your mouth. Reach for it or do not. Harry looked at the kitchen for a long moment. He understood the shape of the temptation precisely because it was built out of his own wanting, and he had spent his life learning to recognize his own wanting and not be ruled by it. Every night of 8 years had a version of this in it, the fantasy where he was not small, where the hand stopped in the air, where for once the room was afraid of him instead of the other way round. The warden had reached into him and pulled out the truest hunger he had and laid it on the floor and said, take it. And he saw, looking at it, exactly why he wouldn't. It wasn't earned. That was the first thing, and it was the smallest. A mastery handed to him would be a mastery he didn't understand, a sword someone else had ground, and he had learned at the lion's door that an unground want got you nowhere, and a borrowed one might get you killed. But under that was the real reason, and the real reason was that the offer was a trade, and he could see what he'd be trading. He'd be trading the thing he'd just spent 11 nights learning, that power you don't know the cost of is just a faster way to die, for the relief of never being afraid in that kitchen again. He'd be paying for safety with the one discipline that had begun, for the first time in his life, to make him feel like a person instead of a problem. The kitchen would be solved. And he would be a boy who had taken a finished weapon he didn't comprehend because he couldn't stand to be frightened for one more season, and he had been frightened for 8 years and survived it, and he was not going to sell what he was learning to buy his way out of a few more months of it. No, Harry said, leave it, I'll earn it or I won't have it, and I can stand the kitchen a while longer. I've stood it this long. The frozen kitchen dissolved. The warden said nothing, which Harry found worse than approval and better than scorn, and the second thing came. This time there was light, a single point of it, far off in the dark, gold and steady, and Harry understood without being told that it was the Eagle's Hall, the unwritten tongue, the second discipline, the one he had asked for and been refused. And between him and it the dark resolved into a path, and on the path, written in the sliding script he had learned to half-read, were the words of the test, and the test said, "The second hall holds the record of who buried this place and why. I can open it to you now tonight, and you may read the whole of the crime, the names, the method, the profit, everything that was done and by whom. You have wanted this since the 11th night. It is the answer to the question that has kept you awake. Reach for it." Harry almost did. This one was harder than the kitchen, much harder, because this one was not built from a child's hunger, but from the thing in him that was most truly himself, the need to understand, the need to have the whole of a thing and not the library book version of it. He wanted to know who had done this, and why more than he had ever wanted to be safe in a kitchen. The warden had found the center of him and offered to feed it, and that exactly was why he stopped his hand. It was the same trade as the first, dressed in better clothes. The first offer had said, "Take power you haven't earned and skip the work." This one said, "Take the answer you haven't earned and skip the work." Osric had told him the Eagle's Hall did not open for the curious, that it opened for a keeper. For one the whole vault had named, and here was the vault, mid-naming, offering to hand him the contents of the Eagle's Hall as a reward for being clever and hungry, which were the two things Osric had said the hall specifically did not open for. It was a contradiction, and Harry trusted contradictions. They were where the truth hid. The offer could not be real. Or worse and more likely, it could be real, and that was the trap, that he could have the answer now, dishonestly, and spend the rest of his life as a boy who knew the truth but had skipped the discipline that would have let him do anything about it. Knowing the names of the men who buried the magic would not, by itself, unbury it. He'd be a child holding a stolen answer he had no power to use, and he'd have proven himself exactly the kind of hand the Founders had feared, one that reached for the secret and not the strength. "No," he said again, and it cost him more than the first no had. "I want it more than anything you could offer me, that's why I'm not taking it. If I'd take the answer dishonestly, I'd take anything dishonestly, the first time I wanted it badly enough. And you'd be right not to trust me with the whole, because I'd already have shown you I'll cheat for what I love." He set his jaw. "Open it when I've read my way to it, not before." The gold point went out. The dark came back total, and it held longer this time, and Harry stood in it and waited and did not let the waiting become fear, because the edged word had taught him that fear was a second want and he could burn it off, and he burned it off and stood in the dark as something with no fear in it, which was its own kind of edge. The third thing did not come as a vision. It came as a question spoken into the dark, and it was the simplest of the three and the one Harry would remember longest. "I have offered you power and you left it. I have offered you truth and you left it." The warden's voice had changed, fractionally. Under the deep layered purpose there was something almost like curiosity, the curiosity of a thing that has not been surprised in 400 years and has just been surprised twice. "So tell me, boy, and tell me true, for this is the weighing and the other two were only the scale. What do you want this place for? Not what you will refuse, what you will take." A keeper is not a boy who says no to everything. A keeper is a boy who knows what the yes is for. So, the yes, what is it? Harry stood in the dark and thought about it honestly, because he had just told the warden twice that he would not cheat for what he loved, and the fastest way to make that a lie would be to perform an answer here. What did he want it for? The noble answer rose first: to right the wrong, to unbury the magic, to free the island from the lie. He looked at it and set it down, because it was the kitchen all over again. It was the answer he thought the judge wanted, dressed as virtue. He did not yet care about the island. He had never met the island. The island had let him rot in a cupboard for 8 years and would not have lifted a finger. He would not stand in the dark and pretend a love he didn't feel to pass a test, because that was exactly the kind of lie the men who'd built the golden fountain told, and he would rather fail honest than pass as one of them. So he reached past the noble answer into the place where the true ones lived, and he found it, and it was smaller and more selfish than the noble answer, and he gave it anyway because it was true. "I want it because it's mine," Harry said. "Not the island's, mine. The whole of my life I've been told what I'm allowed to have, how much food, how much warmth, how much I'm allowed to know, and the people telling me always had more than they were giving me, and I always knew it, and I could never prove it, and I could never do anything about it. And then I found a wall that woke up only for me, and a school that named me before I was born, and 4 arts that nobody alive is allowed to learn, and a dead man and an elf who waited 400 years, and it turns out they were waiting for me." His voice did not shake, but it was not flat now either. "I want it because for the first time in my life there's a lock that opens for my hand and not against it. That's the yes, not to save anybody. To stop being a thing that other people decide the size of, to be the one who decides for once instead of the one who's decided about." He stopped. The dark was absolutely silent. And he added more quietly, because he had started telling the truth and found he couldn't stop partway. "If it turns out that the only way to keep it mine is to break the thing that buried it, if the men who decided the size of my whole world are the same men who decided the size of everyone's, then I expect I'll end up caring about the island after all. But I'm not going to lie to you and say I do yet. I care about not being small. The rest I'll come to honestly or not at all." For a long moment nothing happened. Then the gold came back into the rotunda, not in a flood but rising, the way warmth rises into a room when a fire's been lit in the next one. And with it came the braid of 4 voices, all of them at once, and the single judging voice was gone, folded back into the 4, and the 4 where Harry would not have believed it of a thing made of stone and 400-year purpose. The 4 were pleased. That, said the cool, clear eagle voice, is the truest answer any of them has ever given, and it is true precisely because it is not noble. The noble ONES lied to us. The noble ONES always lied. They wanted it for the people, they said, and then they used it for themselves, because a man who starts by lying about why he wants power will lie about what he does with it. You started selfish and honest, said the deep earth voice, the badgers warm as banked coals, and an honest selfishness grows into something. A light about virtue only ROTS. We built this place, said the soft low serpent voice, the one that gave away nothing, for the hand that would reach for its own freedom first. Because that hand cannot be bought with the offer of someone else's. You cannot bribe a boy with safety who has already decided he would rather understand. You cannot buy a boy with truth who has already decided he will only hold what he has EARNED. The men who buried us could be bought with both. That is the whole of the difference, and it is enough. And the lion voice last, rough and grinning and somehow impossibly proud. Be keeper then, boy. The vault is named to you and you to it. What was ours is yours to hold and in time to give. Welcome to the Underschool. You are no longer a guest in it. You are its heart. The bonding did not feel like a ceremony. It felt like a key turning in Harry's own chest. The 4 arcs in the floor blazed, and the light ran up the walls and into the spiral of sealed doors and across the dark ceiling at last, so that for the first time Harry saw the whole of the rotunda lit, saw that the lost in dark ceiling was a dome, and that the dome was carved, every inch of it, with the 4 beasts braided together into a single endless knot, lion into eagle into badger into serpent and round again, and at the center of the dome, directly above the disc he stood on. A single open eye worked in gold that the instant the light reached it, opened wider and looked down and saw him and knew him. And then the bond reached down into him and did something he felt as a settling, a closing over, as if a door he had not known was open in him had quietly shut and locked from the inside with him safely behind it. He understood it before Osric explained it, because he understood most things before they were explained now, but Osric explained it anyway, reappearing at the edge of the lit rotunda with his shadow shape standing differently, straighter, Harry thought, like a servant whose long watch is finally being relieved. The vault hides what's its own, Osric said, always did. It's how this place stayed buried but not found for 400 years, the door, the stair, the halls, all of it folded just sideways enough of the world that nothing above could stumble on it. You've been protected by that every time you came down, but you were a guest then. The hiding stopped at the threshold. Now you're its heart, and the vault hides its heart the way it hides everything else it loves. The shadow tilted. You're harder to find now, Harry, all of you, not just the part of you that's down here. Harder to track, harder to read, harder to hold in the mind. A wizard who tried to scry you would slide off. A wizard who tried to follow you would lose the thread. A wizard who walked into that kitchen looking for a boy who'd opened a buried door would find a boy who darns socks and burns the bacon and is in no way remarkable, because the vault would put that boy between him and you. A dry sound. It's the serpent's art doing it for you, the full hidden hand the founders kept and the men above only cut a sliver of. You haven't learned it yet, but it's learned you. You're wearing it like a coat you didn't know you'd been given. Harry tested the coat the next day because he tested everything, and the testing told him more about what he had become than the bonding had. He did a small magic in plain sight. Not in the cupboard, not in the dark, on the walk home from the library, on the open pavement of Wisteria Walk in the 4 o'clock light, with a postman 30 feet off, and a woman scrubbing her step and 2 boys from his year kicking a ball against a wall. Stopped, and he moved a sweet trapper along the gutter with the edged word, a foot 2 feet against the wind, a thing that should have made the woman look up and the postman frown and the 2 boys point, a thing that, done by any other unregistered child in Britain, would have brought a ministry owl by nightfall. Nobody looked. The wrapper slid against the wind in the open street, and the world's eye went over it and past it and found the hedge more interesting, the post box, the weather. The woman scrubbed her step. The postman whistled. The 2 boys never broke their game. Harry stood on the pavement having done magic in broad daylight in front of 5 people and a ministry trace that should have been screaming, and the silence held, the coat held, and he understood at last the difference between the hiding he had done all his life and the hiding the vault did for him. His whole life he had hidden by being small, by giving the world nothing to see, by spending every waking hour making sure he was not worth a glance, exhausting, ceaseless, a thing he had to do himself with his whole attention. The coat did it for him without his lifting a finger, while he stood in the open being as remarkable as he liked. He had spent 8 years building a thin, trembling version of this with his bare hands alone. The true thing had been wrapped around him in a single night, and it would never tire because it was not him doing it. It was the vault keeping its heart. He nearly wept on the pavement and didn't, because weeping was a thing that got you noticed, and then he laughed once short, because for the first time in his life it didn't matter if he was noticed at all. The eagle's door opened to him after that, not the record of the burial, which the warden had refused him and which he had refused himself, but the discipline, the unwritten tongue, the thing he would need before the record would do him any good. And the hall of the eagle was nothing like the hall of the lion. Where Gryffindor's hall was racks of edged things in honest gold light, Ravenclaw's was a single vast room that refused to hold still, shelves that ran in directions Harry's eye couldn't follow, stairs that arrived where they had not been a moment before, and everywhere, drifting in the air like motes in a sunbeam, fragments of the sliding script, broken sentences, half spells, turning slowly in the light. "Don't try to see the room," Osric said at the threshold. "You can't. It isn't built to be seen. It's built to be thought through." Ravenclaw didn't make a library. She made a mind and left it standing, and the room is what the inside of understanding looks like when you build it in stone. Walk in, stop trying to map it, let it teach you how it's read. Harry walked in and stopped trying to map it, which was the single hardest thing the archive had yet asked of him, because mapping was what he did, mapping was how he'd survived, and the Eagle's Hall would not be mapped. It would only be understood, which was a different muscle, one he had never been allowed to use at full stretch. He stood among the turning fragments and stopped reaching for the edges of the room and let the room come to him, and slowly, the way a stereogram resolves if you let your eyes go soft, he began to see it not as a space but as a structure, a thing with a grammar, and the grammar said, "Everything here is a spell taken apart so you can see how it's made." The first lesson of the unwritten tongue was the lesson that broke the world open for him, and Osric gave it as a single sentence, standing in the impossible room. "Every spell ever cast," the dead man said, "is a sentence in a language, and most wizards speak the language the way a parrot speaks English. They've learned the sounds that get the cracker, and they think the sounds are the magic. They aren't. The magic is the grammar under the sounds. The wand word, the gesture, the Latin the bright school is so proud of, that's the parrot's cracker sounds. Underneath every one of them is a true structure. This acts on that in this way, bounded by these conditions, paid for at this cost. Learn to read that structure and the wand words become what they are, a child's mnemonic, a way to remember the shape without understanding it. And once you can read the structure, Harry, the shadow leaned in, you can write it. You can take a spell apart, see the false condition some clever man built into it to make sure only his sort could cast it, cut that condition out and hand the spell to anyone. You can read a ward and find the assumption it rests on and pull that assumption out from under it like a rug. The men above can only cast, you're going to learn to edit. Harry spent the next month learning to read. It was slow, and it was the most alive he had ever felt. The unwritten tongue did not cost him the way the edged word did. There was no scooped-out ache behind the eyes, but it cost him in a different coin, in sleep and in attention, because once he could half-read the structure of spells he could not stop seeing it, and the world above turned suddenly transparent and strange. He looked at the lock on the cupboard door and saw, faint under it, the dumb mechanical grammar of a thing that only knew open and shut, and he understood for the first time fully that the entire Muggle world was full of locks that had no idea they could be argued with. He looked at the careful blank ordinariness that now sat over him like a coat and began dimly to read its structure too, the serpent's art, working on his behalf, a sentence the vault was speaking over him so that the world's eye slid off. And he learned to build a memory palace, which Osric said was the eagle's first true work and the foundation of everything else, because the unwritten tongue could not be held in an ordinary memory. It was too large and too strange. You had to build a place inside yourself big enough to keep it. He built his in the shape of the cupboard. Osric tried to talk him out of it. "Build it grand," the dead man said. "Build it a palace. Everyone builds it a palace, marble halls, 1,000 rooms, golden doors. The mind expands to fill the space you give it. Build it small and you'll think small." "No," Harry said. He had thought about this. "I'm building it as the cupboard, 4 feet wide, the bare bulb, the shelf of tins, the map of the stairs on the inside of the door." He looked at the dead man steadily. "Because the cupboard is where I learned to keep everything that mattered without anyone finding it. It's already the safest room I've ever had. A palace is a place I'd have to learn to defend. The cupboard I've been defending my whole life. Nobody's ever got into it but me. I'm not making my mind bigger. I'm making it the one room in the world that's never been breached." The shadow was quiet a long moment. "Build the cupboard," Osric said at last, and there was something in the dry voice that Harry a year ago would not have been able to name, and could now, because the archive had taught him to read structures, and a voice was a structure too. It was respect, and under the respect, grief, the grief of a teacher who has just understood exactly how a child came to be wise and would have given anything for the child to have come to it some easier way. So Harry built the cupboard inside himself, 4 feet wide, with a shelf and a bulb and a map on the door, and into it he put the unwritten tongue as fast as he could learn it. And he tested it the way he tested the coat. He filled a shelf of it with 100 fragments of the sliding script on a Tuesday, and on the Friday, in the middle of cooking the bacon, reached for one without warning, the 43rd fragment, the one about bounded conditions, and it was there, instant, whole, exactly where he had filed it, and the cupboard held, and nothing he put in it could be read or found or taken by anyone but him. And the coat the vault had given him grew a lining of his own making, so that now he was hidden twice, once by the serpent's old art, and once by the small, stubborn fortress of a boy who had spent his whole life learning to keep secrets in a space 4 feet wide. It was the lining that saved him in the end when the gray man came. The gray man arrived in Little Winging on a wet Thursday and stayed 11 days, and in all that time not one person who saw him could afterward have said they had. He was not invisible. Invisibility was crude, a child's art, a thing that left a hole in the world where a man should be, and any trained eye could find the hole. The gray man did something subtler, the thing the cut-down hand was filed to do. He made himself not worth attention. He walked down Privet Drive in the rain in a gray coat and a gray hat, and people's eyes went over him and past him and found the hedge more interesting, the post box, the weather. Mrs. Number 6 watered her ferns 6 feet from him and did not see him. A milk float passed close enough to splash his shoes, and the milkman's gaze slid off him onto the next doorstep. He was a smudge the world's attention declined to resolve, and he moved through Little Winging for 11 days, reading the place the way Harry had learned to read a spell, looking under the dumb ordinary surface for the structure, for the seam, for the wound in the lattice that the southern needle said was here. He found the wound. He was very good. By the 4th day he had narrowed it to the street, and by the 7th to the odd-numbered side, and on the 9th he stood across the road from number 4 in the rain and looked at it with senses that had been trained in the same well the archive had been buried in, and he felt there, faint, deep, sealed, the cold edge of a thing that should not be under a house with no cellar. And then he looked for the boy. There would be a boy or a person, a hand that had opened it. The door did not open itself. He had quartered the street's children already, brushed against each of them with the part of his art that read a person the way the rest of it read a place, and found them exactly what they appeared to be: ordinary, loud, dull, unmarked. There was a fat one at number 4 who registered as nothing but appetite. And there was, the records said, a second child at that address, a nephew, a scrawny dark-haired thing the neighborhood barely mentioned, and the gray man turned his attention onto that one, expecting to find either nothing or everything. He found a boy who darned socks and burned the bacon and was in no way remarkable. He pressed. He was patient, and he was expensive because he was patient, and he pressed his art against the dark-haired boy the way a man presses a thumb against a bruise, looking for the place that flinches. And the boy stayed ordinary, stubbornly, perfectly, seamlessly ordinary, a small, unloved child of no consequence, every probe sliding off a surface that gave back exactly the dull data a probe expected, no hole, no smudge, no flinch, nothing to resolve. The gray man, who had unmade the disguises of grown wizards who had spent decades building them, stood in the rain and pressed on an 8-year-old and could not find the door in him, because the door in him was 4 feet wide and had a shelf of tins and had never, in its whole existence, been opened by anyone but the boy himself. On the 11th day the gray man went away and wrote a report, and the report cost Aldous Vane a great deal of his composure, though Vane was far too disciplined to let the cost show to the man who delivered it. The vault is there, the report said in the gray man's flat gray prose, beneath a house in Surrey. I located the wound to within a single dwelling. The first seal is broken, as the instrument reported. I felt the bleed of it, but there is no hand. I quartered every soul on that street and within it. There is no wizard, no witch, no marked child, no concealed adult, no trace of any person capable of having opened that door. The seal is broken, and there is no one who could have broken it. A pause in the prose, the only place the gray man's perfect flatness wavered. Either the door opened itself, which you tell me is impossible, or there is a hand on that street so deeply hidden that I, and I do not say this lightly, having never said it before, cannot find it. I can find anything. I could not find this. Draw your own conclusion. Mine is that you are not dealing with a clever child who stumbled on a secret. You are dealing with a keeper, fully bonded, wearing the vault's own concealment, and if that is so, then I am the wrong tool, and so, provost, are you. Vane read the report 3 times alone, and then he did a thing he rarely did, which was to call the 2 curators he trusted most into the windowless room and tell them more of the truth than he told anyone. It is a keeper, he said to Ostrander and Quill, and he watched the words land. Fully bonded, the first in 406 years. The gray man cannot find it. I will not be able to find it. The vault has taken it under the Founder's own concealment, which is the whole and undiminished art, not the sliver we kept, and that means it can now slide off every instrument and every craft we possess, because every instrument and every craft we possess was built by men who only ever held the sliver. He let that sit in the cold of the room. Do you understand what I am telling you? For 400 years we have been the only ones in Britain who could not be found. We built our whole safety on owning the dark, and the dark has just produced a child who owns more of it than we do. Ostrander, who had spent 30 years deciding what St. Mungo's healers were forbidden to learn, had gone the color of the table. Then it is over, she said. If it cannot be found, it is not over, Vane said, and his flatness did not waver because his flatness was the thing the room ran on. A thing that cannot be found can still be waited for. The boy is hidden, but the boy is a boy, and a boy grows, and a keeper who has learned what is down there will one day have to come up and use it, because that is what the vault is for. It is not a hiding place, it is a weapon, and weapons insist on being spent. When he spends it, he will be in the light, and the light is ours. He folded the report. Until then, we do nothing he can see. We do not tighten the silence. We do not recall a text or adjust a curriculum. We let the boy believe he has all the time in the world, and we use that same time to make certain that the day he stops hiding is the worst day of his life. Now go, and do not speak of the word keeper outside this room. It is the only word in the language that can end us, and I will not have it loose. He sent them away frightened, which was correct, because frightened curators were careful curators, and he sat alone afterward with the gray man's report and the cold understanding that he was, for the first time in his life and the first time in his office's long history, facing a thing his predecessors had not provided for, and that he would have to provide for it himself. Below Surrey that same night, Harry sat on the lion-carved stool in the lit rotunda with the cupboard-built hole inside him and the unwritten tongue filling it shelf by shelf, and he turned to the shadow of the dead underkeeper and said the thing he had earned the right to say at last. I can read now, Harry said. Not everything, but the structure. I can see how a spell is made. He looked toward the Eagle's Hall, where the record of the burial waited behind a discipline he had nearly mastered. You said the why of it is written in there in a language I'd need to read. I can read it now, so... His voice was very level, and under the levelness was the oldest hunger he had, the one he'd refused the warden and could now satisfy honestly by work the way he'd promised. Open it. Show me why they buried this place. I've earned the hearing of it. You said so yourself. Osric, who had waited 400 years to have someone to tell, who had given his shadow to keep the lamps lit against exactly this hour, inclined the place where his head would be and said, Yes, you have. Tomorrow night, when the wall lets you in, I'll take you to the bottom of the Eagle's Hall, and I'll show you the crime this whole school is the answer to. Sleep first. You won't sleep well after. Chapter 3 and Chapter 4, Why it was buried. The bottom of the Eagle's Hall was not a place you walked to. It was a place you understood your way into, and Osric made Harry do the understanding himself, because, the dead man said, a truth you were carried to was a truth you'd never trust. The records at the deepest point of the structure, Osric said, at the threshold of the room that refused to be seen. The point furthest from the surface, the hardest to reach, because the founder who kept it knew that anyone clever enough to read it would be clever enough to misuse it, and she wanted only the ones who'd earned the whole grammar to arrive. You've earned it, so arrive. Don't ask me the way, read the way. Harry walked into the impossible room and stopped looking for a path, and instead held in his mind the thing he wanted, not the answer, but the structure that would hold the answer, and let the room arrange itself around the wanting. The drifting fragments of script slowed and turned and began to align, the way iron filings align to a magnet they cannot see, and where they aligned a direction opened, not a corridor but a logic, this fragment leading to that one leading to a third, a chain of grammar he could follow if he kept his mind soft and his want sharp. He followed it. The room folded around him as he went, shelves passing through shelves, the gold light thickening, and the deeper he read the older the fragments became, until the script stopped sliding out of focus and held still for him, because he had earned the holding still of it, and he came at last to the deepest point of the structure, which was a single round room with a single object at its center. It was a basin. Shallow, broad, carved from the same bone-pale stone as everything else, and full to the brim with a substance that was not water and not light but something between, a pale liquid that held its own glow and turned slowly as if stirred by a hand long gone. Pensive, Harry said. He knew the word from his 2 easy books, where it had been a single line in a woodcut. He had not known they could be this large or this old or this full. The first one, Osric said quietly, or near enough. Ravenclaw made it to hold what could not be trusted to a page, because a page can be burned and a page can lie and a page cannot make you feel the weight of a thing the way standing inside it can. What's in there isn't a story about the burial, Harry. It's the burial. The memories of the ones who saw it, given freely or taken at the end, poured in and kept, so that whoever came after would not read about the crime but witness it. She knew, you see. She knew that whoever buried this place would write the histories afterward, and that the histories would lie, and that the only defense against a lie that's had 400 years to set is to let the next clever child stand in the truth with their own 2 feet. The shadow drew back. Go in. I can't go with you. I've no memory to spare, and the basin would take what little of me is left. You go alone, stand in it, see it, and come back to me because you'll want someone to come back to. Harry looked at the turning pale liquid and did the arithmetic, and it came out the way it always did. He leaned forward over the basin until his face touched the surface, and the surface took him, and he fell upward into 400 years ago. He stood in the rotunda, and it was full of people, and they were afraid. Not the rotunda he knew, lit and lived in, but the rotunda dying, the gold light guttering in the arcs, the 4 halls' doors standing open and bleeding their contents up the great stair in the arms of fleeing scholars, and everywhere the noise of a place being abandoned in a hurry that was trying very hard to look like an orderly retreat. He understood, with the strange total knowing the pensive gave, that this was the last day. That the founders were long dead by now, generations dead, and that what he was watching was not the founders' work but their heirs' undoing of it, and that the memory had been kept precisely so that no one could ever again pretend the founders had wanted this. A man stood at the center of the rotunda. On the disc Harry now stood on his keeper, and he was giving orders in a calm, even unhurried voice, and the voice went through Harry like cold water because he knew that voice. Not the man was a stranger, robed in the deep green and silver of a high office 400 years gone, but the voice, the flatness of it, the fact that it never rose because it had never needed to. It was Aldous Vane's voice in another man's throat 4 centuries early, and Harry understood that he was not looking at an ancestor by blood but at something worse, an ancestor by office. The same role, the same flatness, the same calm certainty, worn down the generations like a coat handed from one cold man to the next. You will not call it a theft, the green-robed man was saying to a knot of scholars who were not fleeing, who stood arguing with him even now. You will not call it a burial, you will call it a sealing for the safety of the realm, and you will sign the charter that says so, and in 100 years no one will remember there was any other word for it. Words are the only walls that last. Build the right ones now, and the stone walls will never be tested. You're hiding it because you can sell it, said one of the scholars, a woman, gray-haired, furious, and Harry's chest tightened because she stood the way he imagined he might one day stand, all the fear burned off into one edge. Not the magic, the not having of it. You're going to sell people the lack. I am going to do, the green-robed man said without heat, what every wise government does, which is to decide what its people are ready to know. The edged word in a peasant's hand is a peasant who fights his lord. The unwritten tongue in a clerk's hand is a clerk who reads the Lord's own bindings and finds them wanting. The deep loam, and here for the only time the flat voice paused, and something moved under it that was not calm. The deep loam in anyone's hand is the end of us, because the deep loam can give back what was taken, and we are about to take a very great deal, and a thing that can be given back is a thing that was only ever lent. No, these 4 arts do not make the realm safer, they make it ungovernable. They make every man the equal of his betters, and a world of equals is a world with no one to keep the order, which is to say no one to keep the profit, which is to say no one like me. He turned to a clerk. Seal it, all 4, and the hand Slytherin's art, the concealment we keep. Cut it down to what we need and no more, and license it to no one outside this office, ever. A locksmith does not hand out copies of his keys. And the school above, the clerk asked. School above continues, the green-robed man said, brighter than ever. That is the genius of it. We do not close Hogwarts, we make Hogwarts beloved. We fill it with light and feasts and house points and 100 small wonders, and we teach the children the alphabet of magic so beautifully that not one of them in 10 generations will ever think to ask whether there was more. A locked door makes a man curious. A school he loves makes him grateful. We are not going to lock the people out of magic. We are going to teach them to thank us for the portion we allow them. He looked around the dying rotunda, at the open halls, at the fleeing scholars, and Harry saw him smile, the small, even smile of a man watching a sum come out right. In 100 years they will sing songs about the founders' generosity. In 200 they will not believe this room exists. In 400 a provost like me will sit in a quiet office and watch a needle that never moves, and the whole thing will run on nothing but a story and a silence, and it will be the richest, safest, most perfect machine ever built, and no one will ever know it is a machine at all. That is what a wall of words can do. Seal it. The gray-haired woman lunged for him. Harry never saw with what, a wand or a word or only her hands, and the green-robed man's guards took her, and the memory's owner turned away, and so Harry did not see what became of her in the moment. But the basin held more than one memory, and the grief that had poured it in had not been able to look away forever, and a little later, in another fragment, Harry saw the end of her. Saw her brought before the green-robed man in chains of a making he did not recognize, saw her offered the one mercy the new order had to give, that she could keep her life if she would give up her memory of what the Underschool had been, let it be cut from her clean, and live out her days as a witch who had never known there was more, and he saw her refuse it. Saw her say, with the fear all burned off into the one edge, that a person who let them take the memory was a person who agreed the taking was allowed, and that she would not agree, not with her mind and not with her silence, and that they could have her life but not her knowing. And the green-robed man, who did not hate her, who felt nothing for her at all, had simply nodded, the way a man nods at a sum, and had it done. And her memory of the Underschool had been the last free copy of the truth in the world above until a grieving scholar poured it, and her into a basin so that 400 years later a boy would stand inside her refusal and feel exactly what it had cost and exactly why it had been worth it. The sealing itself the memory showed in full because the memory's owner had made themselves watch that part as a penance. It was not violent, that was the horror of it. The green-robed man walked the spiral of doors with his clerks, and at each one spoke the charter words, the sealing for the safety of the realm, and at each door the gold went out and the iron went black and the discipline behind it went silent, one after another, calm and orderly and legal, a crime committed entirely in the grammar of governance, signed and witnessed and filed. The lion's door, the eagle S, the serpents after they had cut from it the sliver they wanted. And last, deepest, with the most words and the heaviest seal, the badger's, the deep loam, sealed not first as the most dangerous but last, as the most feared, the door they wanted closed so thoroughly that even the act of closing it was buried under more law than all the others combined. And as the last seal took, the founder's own intelligence, the warden, the braid of four, the thing in the walls, woke too late and screamed. Harry felt the scream from inside the memory, and it was the worst thing he had ever felt, worse than any hunger or blow or cold, because it was the sound of a made thing realizing it had failed at the one purpose it was made for, the sound of a guardian waking to find the thing it guarded already lost, and it had been screaming, Harry understood in some sense, for 400 years down in the dark, with no one to hear it but a dead underkeeper and a notch-eared elf. Until a boy came down a stair who carried all 4 threads and asked, on his very first night, the right question first. He came up out of the basin shaking, and Osric was there, and Harry did not say anything for a long time, and the dead man wisely did not make him. Now you have the heart of it, Osric said at last, not the shape, the heart. They didn't bury it because it was dangerous. They buried it because it was theirs to bury and ours to lose, and the losing made them rich. Every wall the world above has ever told you was for your protection, the licensing, the lists of forbidden arts, the careful narrow curriculum, the bright beloved school that teaches you to be grateful. Every one of them is a brick in the wall of words that man started building 400 years ago. And the men who own the wall own everything the wall keeps out, which is to say they own you and me, and the whole island's idea of what magic even is. The shadow's voice was very quiet. That's the why, Harry. It was always the simplest why there is. Somebody profited, and somebody still does. Harry wanted to see the size of it, not just feel it, and so before he left the Eagle's Hall he did a thing the unwritten tongue had made possible and that no one in 400 years had been alive and able to do. He asked the room to show him the 2 curricula side by side. The Bright School's first teaching as the founders had said it, and the Bright School's teaching now. The room obliged. Built the 2 of them in the air out of aligned fragments, 2 great branching structures of what a child could be taught, and the difference between them was the whole argument made visible. The founder's tree was vast and wild and unafraid. Branched into the 4 disciplines and 100 others, into the reading of one's own spells and the mending of one's own wounds and the warding of one's own door, into magic as a thing a person owned and could question and could turn even on the people who taught it. The modern tree, the one Harry would one day be sent a letter to climb, was the same trunk with 9/10 of the branches sawn off, pruned back over 400 years so gradually and so beautifully that each cut had looked in its own generation like prudence, this branch too dangerous, this one too difficult, this one lost, this one never quite on the examination and so quietly dropped. Until what remained was a tidy ornamental thing that produced exactly the kind of wizard the office wanted, skilled, proud, grateful, and entirely unable to read the locks on his own cage. They didn't burn the curriculum, Harry said slowly, reading the centuries of small cuts. That's the part I keep getting wrong. There was no single fire, no one villain with a torch. They pruned it, one reasonable-sounding cut at a time, each one signed off by people who mostly believed they were being careful. 400 years of careful people, each removing one branch that seemed too much, and not one of them ever seeing the whole tree, because the whole tree was the one thing the office made sure no one but the gardener ever saw. He looked at the wild founder's tree and the pruned modern one hanging side by side in the gold light. That's worse than a villain you can fight. This is just everyone being reasonable forever, in a direction someone chose for them 400 years ago and never had to choose again. Now you understand why it held so long, Osric said. Evil that needs a wicked man in every generation fails the first time a generation runs short of wicked men. The green-robed man built something better. He built a machine that runs on good men being careful. That's the masterpiece, Harry, and it's why undoing it is going to be harder than killing anyone, because there's no one to kill. There's only the shape of the thing, and the shape doesn't die when a man does. It just hands itself to the next careful pair of hands. Harry sat on the cold stone at the bottom of the Eagle's Hall and did the thing he did with the worst facts, which was to refuse to look away from them, and he turned the whole machine over in his mind and saw it whole, and the seeing of it did something to him that no blow from Vernon ever had. It did not break him. It clarified him. He had spent 8 years being told the size of his world by people who had more than they gave him, and now he understood that this was not a private cruelty, but the founding principle of the entire society he had been born into, that the whole of the wizarding world was Privet Drive made enormous. A house where a few people in the warm rooms decided how much the rest were allowed to have, and taught them to be grateful for it, and called the cupboard under the stairs a kindness. "The man in the green robe," Harry said. "He's not alive. No, 400 years dead. But his offices, you said it yourself, an ancestor by office, not by blood. There's a man sitting in his chair right now, watching the needle." Harry looked up, and the needle moved. "The night I broke the first seal, didn't it? That's what the green-robed man meant, a provost watching a needle that never moves. It moved, so he knows. Whoever's in that chair now, he knows the vault woke up, and he knows it woke to a keeper, because the green man wrote down that it would. It was not a guess. It was a structure, read off the memory the way he read a spell, every gear of it laid bare. He's been looking for me since January. That's who the gray man in the rain was. He sent him." Osric was silent, and the silence was confirmation. "He didn't find me," Harry went on, working it forward, calm now. The fear burned off into the one clean edge of understanding. "Because I'm hidden, the coat, the vault's concealment, the cupboard I built inside myself. So he knows I exist, and he can't find me, and he can't prove I exist to anyone else, because the only thing that detects me is the needle, and the needle is the secret he most needs to keep. He's stuck. He knows everything and can do nothing." Harry almost smiled and didn't, because it wasn't funny, it was only true. "He's in exactly the position I've been in my whole life. He can see the wrong being done and he can't touch it. Except it's his wrong and he wants to keep doing it, and I'm the one he can't touch." "That," Osric said, "is the most dangerous man in Britain to be unable to touch, and you've just described why. A man who knows he's losing and cannot act, yet does not give up, Harry. He prepares. He waits for the one moment you have to stop being hidden, and he makes very sure that when that moment comes, the ground is his." The shadow turned toward the rotunda, toward the deepest of the four halls, the one sealed last and heaviest, which is why you're going to learn the Badger's art next, the one they feared most, the one that can give back what was taken. Because the day you stop being hidden is the day you start taking things back, and you'll want to know how before you need to. The Badger's door, Hufflepuff's, the deep loam, opened to him the following week, and it was the only one of the four halls that made Harry stop in the doorway and simply look. The other halls were stone and light and strangeness. This one was alive. Beyond the door, the bone-pale floor gave way to dark, rich earth, and out of the earth grew things, not the pale, starved things that grow in the dark, but a whole green country under a ceiling lost in golden haze, trees heavy with fruit out of season, herbs in ordered beds, a slow stream threading through it all that Harry somehow knew had been running, untended, for 400 years, and had not run dry, and had not run wild, because the deep loam did not need a gardener. It was the gardener, woven into the soil itself, patient and enormous and kind in the way that deep things are kind, which is to say without sentiment and without end. "Hufflepuff," Osric said from the doorway, got the last laugh on all of them. "They sealed her hall the deepest, feared it the most, buried it under the most law, and it's the only one that kept itself alive without a single living hand, because growing is what it does, and you cannot seal a thing whose whole nature is to keep going." Ion's blades went still. The eagle's room held its breath. The serpent's art slept. The badger's hall just grew in the dark for 4 centuries, and waited exactly like Nib waited, because patience is the badger's whole genius, and the world above never understood that patience is a kind of power, the slowest and the least defeatable kind. Nib was there in the green hall, and Harry understood at last what the elf had meant on the first night. Nib has kept the lamps, and Nib has kept the loam. The elf had been tending this, all of it, 400 years of it, the one part of the vault that a small, loyal creature could keep alive with its own 2 hands, and Harry looked at the green country and at the elf standing proudly in the middle of it and felt something he had no practice at feeling, which was the urge to say a thing was beautiful, and he said it. "It's beautiful, Nib." The elf's ears came up and its lamp-bright eyes filled, and it did not say anything, because some things are too large for an elf that has waited 400 years to be told its work was good, and Harry understood that too and let it be. The deep loam was the hardest of the disciplines and the one Harry took to fastest, which surprised everyone including the warden. It was hardest because it could not be forced. The edged word answered to a single sharp want. The unwritten tongue answered to clear cold reading. The deep loam answered to neither, because growing and healing were not things you did to the world, but things you did with it in partnership at the world's own pace, and a boy who had spent his life learning to control everything he could reach had to unlearn control to touch it at all. You could not heal a wound by wanting it healed, the way you moved a leaf by wanting it moved. You could only offer the wound the conditions in which it would heal itself, and then wait, and the waiting was the magic, and Harry, who had waited 8 years in a cupboard for a life that never came, turned out to be, against all odds, extraordinary at waiting with intention, at holding a patient space open for a thing to become what it was trying to become. His first true healing was a bird. Nib brought it, a sparrow that had got into the green hall through one of the elf's secret ways and broken itself against the impossible architecture, a small ruined thing with a wing bent wrong and its breath coming in flutters, and Nib held it out in both hands with such naked hope that Harry understood the elf had brought it as a gift and a test at once. "Here is a thing that is dying. You are the keeper. Mend it." And Harry took the sparrow and found, with the new sense the green hall had grown in him, the true root of the broken wing, the place where the bones still wanted to be whole, and he held the space open and gave it the conditions and did not force it, did not grip, did not pour his impatience into it, only waited with the whole of his intention, the way the badger taught, and the wing knit, and the flutter steadied into a breath, and the sparrow, after a while, stood up in his palm and looked at him with one black bead of an eye and flew. The cost of it was small, a tiredness, a sense of having given something he would not get back, and the worth of it knocked the breath out of him, because he had spent his whole life on the receiving end of people who would not lift a finger, and he had just lifted one, and a living thing had flown because of it. That, Osric said, watching the sparrow vanish into the golden haze, is the discipline they feared most, doing the thing they feared most. A mended sparrow today, a mended child tomorrow, a mended world if you live long enough and stay the person who'd stop to fix a bird he had no reason to fix. The dry voice was quiet. The green man was right to be afraid of it, Harry. He just had the danger backwards. He thought the deep loam was dangerous because it could undo what he'd taken. It's dangerous because of what it does to the person who learns it. You can't practice mending for long and stay the kind of person who steps over the broken. It changes the hand that holds it. That's the real reason it's buried deepest. It's the one art that makes the people who have it unwilling to be curators. Because that was the secret of the deep loam, the thing that made it the most dangerous of the four and the most buried. It could give back what was taken, not just bird bone. Wounds of every kind, strength to a starved body. Harry felt it work on him without his asking, felt the green hall quietly mending 8 years of too little food, of cold, of the 100 small subtractions of his life, felt himself becoming, week by week, the boy he would have been if anyone had ever cared to grow him properly. And memory. Osric was careful here, careful in a way he had not been about anything else, because the deep loam could restore stolen memory, could grow back what a mind had cut from it, the very thing the green-robed man had offered the gray-haired woman and she had refused, and that, Osric said, was a power so large that the founders themselves had argued about whether to teach it. It can give back almost anything that was taken, the dead man said, if there's a true root of it left to grow from, a wound, a strength. A memory, a skill. The realm the green man built is a realm of taking. They took the arts, they took the curriculum, they took the people's idea of what was possible, and they have spent 400 years making sure none of it could ever be given back, because a thing that can be given back is a thing that was only ever lent. The deep loam is the proof that it was only ever lent. That's why it's buried deepest. It's the discipline that turns their whole theft from a fact into a debt. Harry was quiet a while. There was a question under all of this that he had been not asking for weeks, the way he not asked most things that mattered, by keeping them on a high shelf where he wouldn't have to look at them, and the green hall had quietly grown enough strength back into him that he could finally take it down. Could it give back a life, he asked. He kept his voice level, and the levelness was the only sign of what the question cost. If a thing was taken, if someone was taken. Could the deep loam? No, Osric said gently, and at once, because the dead man had been waiting for this question and had decided long ago how to answer it. No, Harry, it gives back what was taken if there's a true root left to grow from. The dead leave no root. That's the whole of what death is, the end of the root. The deep loam can mend the living and grow back what a living thing has lost, and it is the most merciful art the founders ever kept, but it is not a door out of grief, and the green man feared it not because it raised the dead, it can't, but because it could mend the living the realm had decided to leave broken. A child the realm starved, a witch the realm let die of a thing sent Mungos was forbidden to learn to treat, because the treatment was an art they'd sealed. A man the realm crippled and called it the natural order. The shadow's voice was very quiet. It can't bring your parents back, nothing can, and I'd be the cruelest thing in this whole dark place if I let you spend one night hoping it could, but it can do the thing that would have mattered more if the world had let it. It can stop the next child from being left broken the way you were. That's what they buried, not a resurrection, a repair. And a realm built on taking cannot survive the existence of a repair, because the moment the people know the broken can be mended, they stop forgiving the ones who broke them. Harry took the question off the shelf and looked at it and put it back. Mended, not answered the way he had once in the worst nights wished it could be answered, but answered truly, and a true answer, he had learned in this place, was worth more than a kind lie because you could build on it. He would not get his parents back. He had known that really since before he could remember knowing it, but he had just been handed the thing that would have saved them if the world had not sealed it away, and he found that he wanted, for the first time honestly, the way the warden had said an honest selfishness grows into something. He wanted the world to never be allowed to do that to anyone again. It was not the noble answer. It had grown from the selfish one, the way the warden said it would. He noticed the growing and did not stop it, and that was the most important thing that happened to him in the green hall, more important than the bird or the strength or the slow mending of his own starved body. He felt himself begin to care about the island he had never met, not because he was told to, but because the deep loam had shown him what had been done to it, and he had been done the same thing, and a boy who has felt a wound knows a wound when he sees it on someone else. Far to the north, in the windowless room, Aldous Vane did a thing he had not done in 11 years, which was to take the founding charter out of its vault and read it from the beginning. He did not read it for the law, he knew the law. He read it the way a general reads the enemy's own map, looking for the thing his predecessors had been too comfortable to look for, and on the third reading he found it, in a clause so old and so buried in the grammar of the ceiling for the safety of the realm that 400 years of provosts had read past it as boilerplate. The ceiling, the clause said, holds against all hands save the keeper. For the keeper holds the founder's own authority, which is elder than this office and stands above it. Vane set the charter down very carefully, the way a man sets down a thing he has just realized is a live coal. Elder than this office, stands above it. The men who built the ceiling had been thorough. They had built it to hold against the world, against the Wisengamot, against the headmaster, against the Aurors, against time itself. But they had not built it to hold against a keeper, because a keeper was the one authority the founders had set above their own heirs, a fail-safe, a key left with the house itself against the day the heirs proved false. The green-robed provost had sealed the vault knowing a keeper could unseal it, and had gambled, correctly, for 4 centuries that no keeper would ever come. A keeper had come. And a keeper, the charter said in its cold old grammar, did not merely hold the 4 arts. A keeper held the authority to undo the sealing itself, lawfully, at the root, with the founder's own elder right, which meant that everything the curators were, everything the office owned, every fortune built on the 400-year monopoly, rested now on the continued silence of a child Vane could not find, who was at this moment somewhere under a green and ordinary county. Learning the one discipline that could turn the whole theft from a fact the world had forgotten into a debt the world would demand be paid. Vane sat for a long time with the charter and the cold coal of the clause, and then he did the thing he always did, which was to think his way to the bottom of the worst case and stand on it. The worst case was no longer that the boy learned the arts. Worst case was that the boy understood the charter, understood that he did not merely possess forbidden power but held the lawful authority to unmake the office at its root and expose 4 centuries of theft to a world that would tear the curators apart for it. A hidden boy with power was a problem that could wait. A hidden boy with power and the legal right to destroy them was a problem that could not. You cannot stay hidden forever, Vane said softly, to the charter, to the needle, to the green county. Our insists on being spent, and the law you hold insists on being used. The day you reach for either, you will have to come up into the light, and I have spent my whole life learning to own the light. He folded the charter and returned it to its vault and sat in the windowless dark, and for the first time he began to plan not how to find the boy, which was impossible, but how to make the boy come to him, which was only difficult. I will not chase you, keeper. I will give you a reason to stop hiding. And then we will see whose ground it is. Below Surrey, in the green hall, Harry finished tending the last of the herb beds Nib had kept for 400 years, stronger than he had been in his life, fuller of stolen and recovered knowledge than any living wizard, and turned to the shadow of the dead underkeeper with the whole machine of the world laid bare in his mind. They'll come, Harry said. It was not a question. They'll come, Osric agreed. Not yet. The man in that chair is patient, the way his office is always patient. He'll not chase what he can't catch. He'll wait and prepare and try to make you come up where he wants you. The shadow turned its eyeless gaze on the boy. So, what does the keeper do, knowing that? Harry thought about it, standing in the green country 400 years buried, 8 years old and no longer small, and the answer he gave was the answer of a boy who had spent his whole life being decided about and had finally, in a buried school, become the one who decides. I get strong enough that it doesn't matter whose ground it is, Harry said, and then I stop hiding on my own terms before he can make me do it on his. He looked toward the Serpent's Hall, the last of the 4, the hidden hand, the discipline of the unseen, the very art the green-robed man had kept for himself and his heirs and cut down to a sliver and licensed to no one. Teach me the last one, the serpents. I want the whole of the art they only kept a piece of. I want to be better at being unseen than the men who own being unseen. A pause, and the smallest hardness entered his voice, the first cold edge of the boy he was becoming. If they're going to come for me in the dark, I'm going to own the dark first. Chapter 4 and Chapter 5. Forbidden Mastery. The Serpent's Hall did not open the way the others had. The others had tested him and then let him in. The Serpent's Hall let him in first and tested him by never letting him be sure he was in at all. There was a door Slytherin S marked with the rampant serpent and the carved word secrecy, and it opened to Harry's hand, and beyond it was a corridor, and the corridor was the test because the corridor lied. It branched where it had been straight, it doubled back on itself and arrived where it had started without ever turning. Doors stood in it that were not doors. The gold light everywhere else in the vault, a steady kindness, here pooled and shifted and would not say where it came from, so that Harry walked through the hall of the hidden hand for what felt like an hour and understood, Finally, standing in a chamber he was nearly certain he had stood in twice already, that the hall was not trying to keep him out. It was teaching him the first lesson of the discipline by doing it to him. "You can't trust your attention here," he said aloud to Osric, who he could not see and who he was no longer certain had followed him in. "That's the lesson. The whole hall is one long demonstration of what it feels like to have your attention bent. You bend mine, so I'll learn the shape of the bending, so I'll know it when it's done to me, and know how to do it." "Took you 40 minutes, Osric's voice said from somewhere that resolved, as he spoke, into the dead man's shadow standing beside a pillar that had not been there. "The cleverest of the others took a day and a half and spent most of it lost and furious. You're angry, but you're not lost. You worked out it was deliberate." The shadow inclined. "That's the hand. The other three arts act on the world, the blade on flesh, the reading on spells, the loam on living things. The hand acts on the only thing none of those touch. It acts on where a mind chooses to look. Everything the green-robed man kept for himself and his heirs, he filed down to this one crude use, making themselves not worth a glance. That gray man who quartered your street, that's the whole of what they have. The cut-down hand, the locksmith's single key." Osric's voice sharpened. "You're about to learn the smith's whole craft. And once you have it, Harry, you'll understand the thing that should frighten you most about the men above. They have been hiding an entire world for 400 years, using a tenth of an art you're going to own the whole of by midsummer." There was a thing Harry had to settle first, though, before any of it, and he settled it the way he settled everything, by noticing the question no one had answered and refusing to leave it alone. "There should have been people at the door by now," he said. "Not yours, the other side's. I've been casting under that house for half a year, moving leaves, cracking stone, healing bark. I read about the trace in the children's books. Magic done by anyone under 17 is supposed to be marked, logged, flagged to the ministry. A boy who lives with mortals and starts doing magic is supposed to get a letter or a visit or both. I never did, so either the books lied or something's eating the mark before it's sent." He looked at the shadow. "I want to know which. Because if it's luck, luck runs out, and I'd rather not learn the day it does." "Then read it," Osric said, and there was approval in the dry voice, the particular approval of a teacher whose student has found the dangerous question on his own. "You've the eagle's tongue. The trace is a working like any other. Find where it's laid on you and read what's happening to it." Harry sat down on the shifting floor of the Serpent's Hall and did the thing the unwritten tongue had made possible. He turned his attention inward onto himself, onto the layer of magic the world had laid over an unregistered child, and he read it, and what he found made him still. The trace was there. It had always been there, a thin official working stitched to him since before he could remember, the ministry's quiet leash on every magical child. But the mark it should have been sending, the flag, the log, the alert, was not arriving anywhere, because the vault's concealment, the coat the warden had wrapped him in on the night it named him keeper, did to the trace's reports exactly what it did to a finder's senses. It slid them off. The trace fired every time he cast. And every time the report went out into the world looking for somewhere to land, and the world's eye, where Harry was concerned, had no purchase, and the report dissolved unread, the way a letter dissolves if there's no name on it the post can hold. "The same art that hides me from him hides me from them," Harry said slowly. "The whole ministry. I could cast in the middle of Privet Drive at noon, and the trace would scream it to an office that can't hear me." He turned it over, every gear laid bare. "That's not luck, that's the vault keeping its keeper, and it means I've got more room than I thought. They can't see my magic, none of them. Only the needle can, and the needle can't say more than south." "Now you understand the size of the gift you've been given," Osric said, "and the size of the trap, because a boy who can't be caught casting is a boy who has to govern himself since no one else can. The trace is a leash, yes, and leashes are cruel. But a child with no leash and no judgment is a child who does something terrible by accident before he's old enough to mean it. You've no leash now, Harry, so you'll be your own, same as everything else down here." He let that sit. "Now, the hand, come and learn to bend a man's eye, since you've just learned that the whole world's eye already slides off you." The learning of it consumed the spring. Harry came down whenever the house forgot him, which was more often now, because the hidden hand had begun teaching him how to make a house forget on command, and a boy who could thicken the Dursleys' inattention at will could carve himself hours where there had been minutes. He learned to do what the gray man did to be a smudge the world's attention declined to resolve, and he learned it in an afternoon, because it was the crudest thing the discipline did, and then he spent 2 months learning the 9 things the gray man could not do, because the gray man had only the sliver. He learned to bend attention toward a thing as well as away from it, so that a watcher's eye would fix on exactly the harmless detail Harry chose, and find everything else dull by comparison. He practiced it on Petunia once, gently, guiltlessly, fixed her whole fretful attention on a watermark on the ceiling for the length of time it took him to walk past the larder she guarded like a dragon and take, for the first time in his life, exactly as much bread as he wanted, and put back what he didn't need, because the taking had never been the point. The point was that for once it had been his to decide. He learned to lay a true ward, not the alarm wards the bright school taught, which announced themselves to anyone who knew the counter. but a ward that hid the fact that there was anything to find, a silence that did not look like a silence. Osric made him lay one over the gap behind the boiler where Nib left the food, and then made him try to find it himself an hour later, and Harry could not, and that was the test passed, a ward you could not find even knowing it was there. And he learned to read the hidden hand the way the unwritten tongue had taught him to read everything, so that he could stand in a room and feel the structure of every concealment laid in it, and tell a true ward from a false one, and tell which had been laid by the cut-down craft of the curators, because their work, he discovered, all carried the same flaw. The flaw of a craft that had been narrowed and inherited and never questioned, a craft that did the one thing it knew superbly and had forgotten it had ever known anything else. Every office concealment was built on the same single assumption, repeated down 400 years like a family knows, and once Harry had seen the assumption, once he saw it everywhere, the signature of the men who owned the dark, written into the dark itself. Tested the reach of it near the end of the spring, and the test was the thing that told him, more than the leaf or the bark or the lie he would soon tell in a garden, exactly what he had become. He did it from the cupboard without leaving Privet Drive, because the hidden hand at full craft did not require a man to be present to read a place. It required only a thread, and Harry had been growing threads all spring, fine lines of attention spun out from the vault's concealment along the seams of the world. He sent one toward the nearest wizarding thing he had ever felt, the little shop tucked behind a laundrette 2 towns over, that he had brushed the edge of once on a walk and filed in the room behind his eyes, and he read it and found, laid over its back room, an office ward of the cut-down craft, a licensing ward, a thing that watched who bought what and reported the buying. And that turned away the attention of anyone who might wonder why a shop selling wands also kept a locked case of things it would not sell. He read the licensing ward the way he read everything, every gear of it laid bare, and he understood, holding its grammar open from a cupboard 2 towns away, that he was looking at the machine itself in miniature, a small, dull, faithful instrument of the 400-year theft, watching the people by the portion they were allowed and quietly making sure they never asked about the case that was locked. He did not break it. Breaking it would have been a sound, and he was not ready to make a sound. But he wrote one small thing into it, one careful edit, a thing no one would notice for years, and that would, when it was finally noticed, be impossible to trace. He removed from the locked case the ward's instruction to turn aside the attention of the curious. He left everything else exactly as it was. He simply made it so that, from that day, anyone who stood in that shop and felt a flicker of wonder about the locked case would be allowed to keep wondering, instead of having the wonder gently lifted from them by a craft they never knew was there. It was the smallest possible act of war, and it was the first, and he did it from a cupboard at the age of 9 without rising from the floor, and when it was done he sat in the dark and understood that the men who owned the dark did not know, would not know for years, that there was now a hand in the world that could reach into their oldest instruments from 2 towns away and edit them and leave no trace, and that the hand belonged to a child they could not find. And then he did the thing that no living wizard could have done, the thing that proved, finally, what he had become, and he did it for a reason that was entirely practical, which was the most dangerous thing about it. He braided the 4. Osric had told him, the very first night in the Lion's Hall, that the 4 disciplines shared a single root, and that a wizard who truly held one would learn the others faster. What Osric had not said, because Osric had never seen it done, because in 400 years no keeper had lived long enough or learned wide enough to do it, was that the 4 could be cast as one, not in sequence, together. The edged word to give an intention force, the unwritten tongue to give it precise structure, the deep loam to let it work with the grain of a thing instead of against it, and the hidden hand to make the whole working unseen even as it happened. Each art alone was a thing a gifted adult might manage. The 4 braided into a single act was not magic of a higher degree. It was magic of a different kind, and Harry came to it the way he came to everything, by needing it, because the day arrived when needing it was the only thing between him and being found. It shouldn't hold together, Osric said, watching him fail at it for the 3rd night running, the braid coming apart in his hands each time, one art always slipping as he reached for the 4th. 4 minds is what it wants, really. 4 founders, that's why they were 4. No one of them could hold all 4 threads at once. That's half of why they built the place together and half of why they fell out. You're trying to be 4 people. No, Harry said, sitting on the cold floor of the rotunda with the failed braid still smoking faintly in the air. I'm trying to be 4 people, that's the mistake. I keep treating them as 4 things I'm holding. He was quiet a moment, reading the failure the way he read everything. But I learned them in the cupboard, all 4, in one head. They were never 4 people in me. They were always one person needing 4 things at once, to push, to understand, to mend, to hide, which is what I needed every single day of my whole life, all 4 at once, every day at that kitchen counter. He looked up. I don't have to become 4 founders. I have to stop pretending I was ever anything but a boy who needed all 4 to survive a Tuesday. The braid's not 4 threads I hold together, it's the one rope I've already been. He braided the four and it held because he had stopped reaching for it as a feat and started reaching for it as the thing he had always already been. And the rope held, and the rotunda lit with a working that had not been performed in the British Isles in 400 years. And Osric, who had watched the cleverest of the others die of the not-seeing, said nothing at all, because there was nothing to say to a thing you had waited your whole death to see and had stopped believing you would. He proved it on a blade. There was a sword in the lion's hall that had been broken, the only broken thing Harry had found in the whole vault, snapped clean across a hand's breadth above the grip, the two pieces lying in their iron cradle where they had fallen 400 years ago. Osric said it had been broken in the fight on the last day, the only blade that had failed its bearer, and that no one had ever mended it because mending an edged-word weapon was not a thing one art could do. The break was not in the metal. It was in the sentence. The true word that had been ground into an edge had been cut in half, and you cannot mend half a sentence with a hammer. Harry mended it with the rope. He held the broken grammar of the blade open with the unwritten tongue and read what the sentence had been before it snapped, the whole true intention of it, an old dead woman's courage ground into iron. He found the living root of it with the deep loam, the place where the sentence still wanted to be whole, the way the sparrow's wing had wanted to be whole. He gave it the force to finish itself with the edged word, his own will poured into the gap where the broken meaning had been. And he wrapped the whole working in the hidden hand so that even the vault, watching, had to look twice to see a child do in an hour what 400 years of the discipline's own keepers had called impossible. The two pieces in the cradle drew together, the break sang shut, and the blade lay whole again in the gold light, its edge bright with a sentence finished by a second hand 4 centuries after the first edged word weapon remade since the day the world ended. He did not pick it up. He had told himself on the first night he would not touch a blade until he understood it, and he understood this one now, understood that he had not needed it to be a weapon. He had needed to know that the 4 arts braided could give back even the thing the Founders' own heirs had been certain was lost for good. If a broken sentence could be mended, so could a buried one, so could 400 years of them. You've just answered the question you'll need most, Osric said quietly, looking at the mended blade. Whether the theft can be undone or only avenged, most who get this far stop at avenged. It's easier, it's louder, it feels like winning. The dry voice was very low. You stopped at mended, remember that when it gets loud. The gray man came back to Little Winging in the last week of June, and this time he did not come to look. He came to bait. Vane had reasoned it through with the cold patience of his office. The boy could not be found. The finest finder in Britain had proven that. But a boy was still a boy, whatever the vault had made him, and a boy lived in a house and walked a street, and a street could be made to do things. If the boy could not be located, then the boy could be provoked, a snare laid not to catch him, which was impossible, but to make him act, because an action was a sound, and a sound could be heard even when the thing that made it could not be seen. The gray man was to lay a working in Little Winging subtle enough that an ordinary child would never notice it and a keeper could not ignore it, and then to watch not for the boy, but for the boy's response, the ripple, the place where the smooth surface of an ordinary street showed, for one instant, that something underneath it was awake. The working the gray man laid was a small masterpiece of the cut-down craft, and Harry felt at the moment it took, the way you feel a draft from a door opened in another room. It was a compulsion ward, seated along the pavements of the odd-numbered side of Privet Drive, and it was beautiful in its restraint. It compelled nothing as crude as obedience. It compelled curiosity. Anyone who walked that pavement would feel, faintly, a tug toward the cellars and the cupboards and the buried places of the houses they passed, a vague itch to look under things, to open closed doors, to investigate the dark spaces of their own homes, and most of them would feel it and forget it, because most of them had nothing under their stairs but tins and old coats. But a child who had found a buried door under his stairs, a keeper whose whole life and bond were wrapped around a thing in the dark beneath a house, would feel that tug aimed straight at the center of him, and would have to fight it, and the fighting would show. That was the trap, not the compulsion, the fight against it. The gray man did not need Harry to obey the ward. He needed Harry to resist it, because resistance was an action, and he stood at the end of the street wrapped in the cut-down hand and watched for the ripple of a child pushing back against a tug no ordinary child should even feel. Harry felt the trap, and felt the trap inside the trap, and went very still. He was 9 years old, and he stood in the front garden of number 4 with a watering can in his hand, because Petunia had set him to the begonias. And he felt the compulsion ward tug at the bond in his chest, and he felt, underneath it, the patient cold attention of a man somewhere at the end of the street waiting for him to flinch, and he understood the whole architecture of it in the space between one heartbeat and the next, that to resist the ward was to be seen, and to obey it was to be led. And that both were losing, and that the man at the end of the street had built a thing with no good answer in it, the way the warden had once built a test with no safe answer, except that this one was built to destroy him and not to weigh him. So he did the thing the man at the end of the street had not accounted for, because the man at the end of the street had 1/10 of an art and Harry had the whole of 4. He did not resist the ward, he did not obey it, he read it. Standing in the garden with the watering can, pouring water on begonias with the dull, careful motions of an unremarkable boy, he sent the unwritten tongue down into the structure of the compulsion ward and read its grammar in a single pass. This acts on that in this way, bounded by these conditions, paid for at this cost, and he found, as Osric had promised he would, the flaw in it, the assumption the cut-down craft always made. The ward assumed that the thing it was hunting would either feel the tug or not. It had no condition for a thing that felt the tug, understood the tug, and answered the tug with a lie. Harry braided the four. It took less than a second, and it was the most complex single act of magic performed in the British Isles in 400 years, and not one person on Privet Drive saw a boy do anything but water flowers. With the unwritten tongue, he held the ward's grammar open. With the edged word, he gave his intention the force to act on it. With the deep loam, he worked with the ward's own nature instead of against it. He did not break the compulsion, which would have been a sound. He fed it, gently, the response it was waiting for, a counterfeit ripple, the exact signature of a keeper flinching, grown to order and offered up like fruit. And with a hidden hand he wrapped the whole working so that the man at the end of the street would feel the counterfeit ripple as real, would see the smooth surface of the street show, for one instant, the thing he had come to see, a child pushing back against the tug, except that the child the gray man would sense pushing back was not at number 4 at all. Harry put the flinch 3 streets over, in an empty house. A signature with no boy under it, planted clean in the dark of someone else's cellar, ripe and convincing and utterly false. Gray man at the end of Privet Drive felt the ripple he had waited 11 days for and turned and went toward it, fast and unseen, and spent the rest of that evening and most of the night quartering an empty house 3 streets over, pressing his cut-down craft into a cellar that held nothing but coal and the fading ghost of a keeper's resistance that he could not, no matter how he tried, resolve into a living child. Because there was no living child there, there had never been a living child there. There was only a thing grown and planted by a boy who had learned, in a buried green hall, that you could give a hunting thing exactly what it was hunting for and watch it run the wrong way with it. And while the gray man chased a counterfeit through an empty cellar, Harry finished the begonias and went inside and washed the watering can and became furniture, and the bond in his chest sat quiet and unflinching, and the man who could find anything had been beaten by a boy he never saw, never sensed, never came within 3 streets of catching. It was the cold of it that frightened Osric afterward. You enjoyed that, the dead man said that night in the rotunda, and it was not entirely approval. No, Harry said, and considered it because he did not lie, least of all to Osric. I didn't enjoy it, I didn't feel much of anything. He came to take the only thing I've ever had that's mine, and he built a trap with no good answer in it, the way they always do, and I found the answer they didn't account for and I used it, and he ran the wrong way. He set the words down flat, one after another, and the flatness was new, and Osric heard the newness in it. I felt the way you feel when a sum comes out. He's not a person to me. He's a problem the men in the warm room sent to find the cupboard. I solved him. I'll solve the next one. A pause. Should I have enjoyed it? Would that be better? No, Osric said slowly. No, the enjoying would be worse. A boy who enjoyed it would be the green-robed man in a smaller coat. The shadow was quiet a moment. But the not feeling anything, Harry, guard that. I'm not telling you to feel for the gray man. He'd have handed you to people who'd have unmade you and felt nothing himself. I'm telling you that the cold that lets you solve a man like a sum is the same cold that let the green-robed man seal 4 arts and sleep soundly after, and the only difference between you and him is what you're cold in service of. Stay cold for the cupboard. Stay cold for Nib and for the next starved child and for the island you've started to care about against your own better judgment. The day you go cold for the cold's own sake, for the pleasure of solving people, that's the day I'd have failed you, and I've not got enough of me left to fail anyone. The dry voice softened. Do you understand the difference I'm drawing? It matters more than any of the 4 arts. Harry thought about it, honestly, the way he thought about everything. I think so, he said. You're saying the cold's a tool, like a blade, not good or evil, only suited or unsuited. And the thing that makes it mine and not his isn't whether I have it, we both have it, it's what I aim it at. He looked at the dead man. He aimed it at keeping people small. I'm aiming it at the people who keep them small. Same blade, opposite edge. Same blade, opposite edge. Osric let out a long breath he did not have. Yes, keep it that way and you'll be the thing the founders built this place to wait for. Lose the difference and you'll be the thing they built it to stop. And no one will be able to tell from the outside, Harry, because the cold looks the same either way. Only you'll know, which means only you can keep the watch. The shadow straightened. End of the sermon. You beat the finest finder in Britain at 9 years old without breaking a sweat. I'd be prouder if I weren't so frightened, and I'd be more frightened if I weren't so proud, and that, I think, is what it is to have raised something that's outgrown you. Harry did not say anything for a moment. The word raised had landed somewhere he didn't have armor for. He took it down off the high shelf, looked at it, and decided for once not to put it back. You did, though, he said. Raise me, some of me, the part that knows the difference between the 2 edges. Nobody up there taught me that. You did. He met the eyeless gaze. I don't have a lot of practice saying things like this, so I'm only going to say it once and then we're never going to talk about it again. Thank you. For waiting 400 years on the chance that someone like me might come, and for being someone worth coming down the stairs to. That's all, don't make it a thing. The shadow of the dead underkeeper, who had given his shadow to the wards to keep them awake through 4 centuries of dark on the chance, the bare, mad 400-year chance, that a child would one day come who was worth the waiting, did not make it a thing. It only bowed once the way it had bowed on the first night, except that the first bow had been a servant's, and this one was something else, something a teacher gives a student exactly once, when the student has become the reason the teacher's whole long failure was worth surviving. Go home, Osric said when he could. Sleep, and Harry, the gray man, will report that he was beaten by something he couldn't find, and the man in the chair will understand at last that he cannot win this from a distance. So the next thing that comes won't be a finder, it'll be him. Are you ready for that? No, Harry said, not yet, but I will be. He's patient, so am I, the badger taught me. He stood. Let him prepare. I'll prepare faster, and I'll prepare for the thing he can't imagine, which is that I'm not going to wait in the dark to be come for. I've spent my whole life waiting in the dark to be come for. The cold edge entered his voice again, the one aimed at the warm rooms. I'm done with that. The next move is mine. In the north, the gray man's report reached Aldous Vane on a gray morning, and it was 3 sentences long, and it ended the gray man's involvement in the matter forever. I laid a flawless snare, and it answered me with a lie I could not tell from the truth until I had wasted a night on it. The thing on that street does not merely hide, it hunts the hunter, and it is better at my own art than I am, by a margin I cannot measure because I never once sensed it act. I resign the commission. There is no fee large enough, and I would not take this contract again for the contents of Gringotts, because a man cannot be paid to catch a thing that has already proven it could have caught him. Vane read it once and set it down and sat for a long while in the windowless room, and what he felt was not the cold flicker he had felt before the golden fountain, the small thrill of a worthy game. What he felt was older and heavier and entirely without thrill. He felt the thing his office had been built to never feel, the thing the green-robed man had gambled 400 years no provost would ever have to feel. He felt the silence failing, and felt that it was failing not to an army or a scandal or a slow leak of forgotten knowledge, but to a single child who was, by every measure Vane could apply, simply better than the entire apparatus arrayed against him, better hidden, better taught, better armed, and worst of all, patient, with the bottomless patience of a thing that had nothing above it, and so could never be threatened from below. He went that gray morning and stood again before the golden fountain in the empty atrium, the noble wizard and the grateful goblin and the adoring elf cast in metal and lit from below, the purest lie his office had ever made, and for the first time in his long, even-tempered life, the sight of it did not please him. It frightened him because he understood, looking at it, that the lie worked only so long as no one below ever learned it was a lie, and that somewhere to the south a child had learned it fully, from the founders' own mouths, and was at this moment better at every art the lie was built from than the men who had spent 400 years telling it. He understood that gray morning that he could not win this the way his predecessors had won everything, which was from a distance, through instruments and proxies and the long cold machinery of the office. The boy had beaten every distance he could put between them, so there was only one move left, and it was the move the office had spent 400 years arranging never to have to make, the move that broke the first and oldest rule of the curators, which was that the provost is never seen. He would have to go himself. He would have to take the founding charter and the original sealing words and the whole weight of the office's elder authority, and go down into Surrey, into the green and ordinary county that had swallowed his secret, and find the thin place where a buried door waited under a house, and reseal the vault by hand, close the wound the boy had opened, lock the 4 arts back into the dark, and trust that with the vault sealed, the boy, whatever he had become, would be cut off from the source of what he was. A keeper with no kingdom, a key to a door that no longer opened. It was the only move that did not require finding the boy. It required only finding the door, which the Southern Needle could do, and reaching it before the boy understood that the door itself, not the boy, was the thing Vane meant to take. You've made me come to you, Vane said softly to the report, to the Needle, to the green county that had beaten his finest hand. After 400 years, you should be proud. No one has ever made a provost leave this room. He folded the report and rose. But you've made a young mistake, keeper, however old you reason. You think this is a contest between you and me. It is. It's a contest between you and the door doesn't love you. The door is a thing that opens and closes, and I have the words that close it, and the founders themselves wrote that the sealing holds, and so it can be made to hold again. He moved toward the vault where the charter slept. Let us see how much of a keeper you are when there is nothing left to keep. Below Surrey, in the lit rotunda, Harry stood with the 4 arts braided in him and the cold tool sheathed and aimed the right way, and he looked at the dead man and the one-eared elf who had become, against every rule he had ever made about not having anyone, the only 2 who had ever waited for him, and he made the decision he had been moving toward since the night he felt the cold in the wall. For my whole life, he said, I've hidden to survive, made myself small so the people in the warm rooms wouldn't see me and take what little I had. And it worked, I'm alive. But it's a loser's game hiding to survive because the people in the warm rooms never stop, they just wait for you to slip, and one day you slip. He looked up at the open golden eye in the dome, the warden looking down. I'm not going to hide to survive anymore, I'm going to hide to win. There's a difference, and the difference is everything. A boy who hides to survive is waiting to be caught. A boy who hides to win is choosing exactly when to be seen. His voice was very level and very young and entirely certain. So let him come. Let the man in the chair leave his windowless room for the first time in 400 years and come down into Surrey thinking he's bringing the words that close the door. The cold edge aimed true. He'll find out the door has a keeper now. And the keeper has been waiting in the dark his whole life for exactly one thing, and it isn't to be saved. It's for the people who decide the size of everyone's world to finally come close enough to touch. The warden's eye, far up in the gold, looked down on the boy it had named, and the braid of 4 voices spoke once, all of them together, and it was not a test and not a welcome, but a thing the founders, made intelligence, had not said to anyone in 400 years, because there had been no one to say it to. Let them come, the vault said. We have waited longer than they have, and we are no longer alone. Chapter 5 and Chapter 6. The suppressors moved. They came on the last night of August, and they came the way the office did everything, which was quietly, lawfully, and with the absolute confidence of men who had never once been told no. Harry felt them 3 hours before they arrived, because he had spent the summer making the thin place under Privet Drive tell him things. It had been the most patient work of his life, and the most invisible, and he had done it with all 4 arts braided so fine that the vault itself had to look twice to see him doing it. He had taken the seam in the cupboard wall, the door, the fold of space where the world bent sideways into the Underschool, and he had grown senses into it the way the deep loam grew roots, so that the whole approach from the back of the cupboard down the 211 steps to the rotunda had become an extension of him, a length of dark he could feel along the way a man feels along his own arm. He had laid the hidden hand over all of it, not to hide it, it was already hidden, but to listen, to feel the first pressure of anything that pushed against the fold from the world above. And he had read the ceiling charter's grammar from the memory in the basin until he knew, cold, exactly what words the office would use to close the wound, and exactly where in their structure the assumption lived that he was going to pull out from under them. He had also in the last week done a thing Osric had argued against and then grudgingly helped him do. He had chosen the ground. You keep saying he'll try to make you fight where he wants you, Harry had said. So I'm going to make him fight where I want him. He has to come through the fold, there's no other way down. So I'll thin everything else and leave the fold the one easy path, and he'll take it, because it's the obvious one, and obvious paths are what confident men take. And the fold is the one stretch of this whole place I've spent 3 months turning into a part of my own body. He'll think he's breaching a door. He'll actually be walking into the inside of my hand. The cold edge aimed true. Let him bring his charter to the one place in Britain where I can feel a spider cross the floor. The thing he could not arrange, the thing he tried to arrange and failed, was Nib. You'll stay in the Green Hall, he told the elf the night before, and he had said it as a keeper says a thing, with the weight of the bond behind it, because he had learned that Nib could refuse him a request but found it very hard to refuse him a command. Whatever comes down those stairs, whatever you hear, you stay in the deepest part of the loam where the wards are oldest, and you do not come up. That's not me asking. That's the only order I've ever given you, and the only one I ever will. He had crouched to the lamp-bright eyes. I can fight a thing that's trying to kill me. I can't fight it and protect you at the same time. If you're safe, I'm free. Do you understand? Keeping you out of it is the thing that lets me win it. And Nib had twisted its hands and looked at the floor and said, Nib understands, in a small voice, and Harry had believed it because he wanted to, which was the one place his careful mind still let him down. He had never had anyone to protect before, and he did not yet know that the people who love you do not always obey you, and that an elf who had waited 400 years for its keeper would weigh a direct order against the sight of that keeper in danger and find when the moment came. That the order weighed less, so when the pressure came 3 hours before midnight, he felt it as clearly as a hand laid flat on his back, and he stopped drying the dinner plates, and he went still in the kitchen of number 4 with the tea towel in his hand, and he sent his attention down into the dark and read the thing that was pushing against the door. It was the ceiling charter, the original. He knew its grammar the instant he touched it. And behind it, pressing it forward, 3 minds no, he corrected himself, reading deeper, 2 minds and a third that was colder and quieter and stood a little apart, directing the other 2 the way a hand directs the fingers. He had never felt that third mind before, and he knew it at once, the way you know a voice from a memory, because he had stood inside a 400-year-old version of it in the basin and heard it give the order to seal the world. The flat, even, never-raised certainty of a man who had come at last in person. Aldous Vane was under the stairs. Harry set down the tea towel. Upstairs, Vernon snored. Petunia's wireless murmured. Dudley slept like a felled tree. The whole ordinary house lay around him exactly as it always had, and not one of the three people in it would ever know that on the last night of August the oldest secret in the wizarding world had come up the garden path and let itself in through a door none of them could see, and that the boy they thought of as furniture was about to fight it. He had prepared for this for 3 months. He was ready. And being ready, he discovered, did not make his heart slow down, and he did not try to make it, because the edged word had taught him that you did not burn off fear by pretending it was absent. You burned it off by deciding it was not in charge, he decided. The fear stayed and stopped mattering, and he went down to meet them. He did not use the cupboard. That was the first thing the summer had taught him. Never meet a thing where it expects the door. He went out the back into the warm dark of the garden, and from there, with the hidden hand wrapped so tight around him that a fox 3 feet away went on washing its face undisturbed. He reached into the fold of space along a seam he had grown himself, a second way in that the office did not know existed, because the office knew only what the green-robed man had written down 400 years ago, and the green-robed man had not known about a boy who could grow new doors into the dark. Harry stepped sideways out of the garden and arrived in the upper approach on the great stair, 50 steps below the cupboard wall and above the place where the three of them had breached. He looked down at the enemy for the first time. They had forced the fold. He could see the wound of it, the seam he knew so well pried wider, its gold light on an ugly bruised violet under the pressure of the sealing words, and standing in the breach 2 figures in the deep working robes of the office, wands out, holding the charter open between them like men holding a door against a wind. And behind them, on the lowest step they had reached, in a plain dark traveling coat with the founding charter itself in his gloved hands, stood Aldous Vane. He was exactly as ordinary as the basin had promised, even-featured, unhurried, a man you would not look at twice on a train. He stood in the violated dark of the Underschool's own approach with the calm of a man inspecting a property he intended to buy, and when he spoke he did not raise his voice because he had never in his life needed to. "There you are," Vane said, not looking up, reading the dark the way Harry read it, feeling the boy arrive above him. "I confess I expected to have to coax you." The young are usually so eager to be seen. He turned the founding charter in his gloved hands. "You are younger than I feared and older than I hoped. 9, 10, a child, 400 years of the most careful work in the history of magic, undone by a child who has not yet lost his milk teeth. There is a lesson in that, I think, though I am too busy tonight to learn it." "You're vain," Harry said. He stayed where he was, 50 steps up in the dark, and he kept his voice level. "Provost of the Office of Educational Standards, the man who watches the needle. You sit in a windowless room and decide what an entire country is allowed to know, and you sell them the not knowing, and you've done it for your whole life because a man 400 years dead taught your office how. It was not a question and not a boast. It was an accounting laid out flat the way he laid out everything. I stood inside your great-great-whatever's memory, the green robe. I watched him seal this place. You've got his voice. Did you know that? You don't even sound like a different man. 400 years and the office just kept handing the same flatness down." Something moved across Vane's even face, not anger. Vane did not do anger, something colder, the flicker of a man who has just been told a true thing he did not expect his enemy to know. "You've read the basin," he said. "Then you know more of our history than any living curator save myself. How interesting, and how useless to you in about 90 seconds. He gestured the smallest motion, and the two sealers in the breach braced and began to read the charter aloud. Harry had been waiting for exactly this. He had run it 100 times in the room behind his eyes, and the run always came out the same, because the sealing charter was a structure, and structures did not surprise him. The charter could not close the wound in one stroke. It had to be read, the full sealing, for the safety of the realm, the same words the green-robed man had spoken at each door, and the reading took time, and time was the gap. And into the gap a boy who could read and rewrite the grammar of a spell mid-cast could put his whole hand. The sealers' voices rose, the old charter words rolling out into the violet dark, and the wound in the fold began to knit closed, the bruised light dimming toward black, the Underschool beginning. Harry felt it in the bond in his chest, felt it like a hand closing over his own heart, to be sealed. He braided the 4, and he went to war. With the unwritten tongue he reached into the charter. The sealers were speaking and held its grammar open, the way he had held the compulsion word open in the garden, except that this was a working 400 years old and laid by the Founders' own enemies and backed by the will of 3 trained wizards, and holding it open was like holding a slammed door against 3 grown men, and the cost of it came up through him at once. The edged word scooped out ache behind the eyes, arriving in the first second instead of the next morning. He held it anyway. He had decided the cost was not in charge. The sealers felt the resistance and pushed, and their voices climbed, and the charter fought to close itself around Harry's grip the way a trap fights a stick jammed in its jaws, and Vane on the lowest step went very still, because Vane understood at once what was happening, that the boy was not blocking the spell. Anyone could block a spell. A block was a wall, and walls could be beaten down. The boy was reading it, inside it, looking for the seam. "Faster," Vane said, the single word flat and cold. He is in the grammar, close it before he finds that Harry found the assumption. It was exactly where the basin had told him it would be, buried in the oldest clause, the clause 400 years of provosts had read past as boilerplate. The ceiling holds against all hands save the keeper S. The green-robed man had written his own defeat into the charter, the fail-safe the founders had demanded that the ceiling could be made to hold, but never against the one the vault had named. The sealers were speaking a charter that contained, in its own deepest grammar, the admission that it could not bind a keeper. They had simply never had a keeper to test it against. The clause had slept harmless for 4 centuries, a dead letter. Harry woke it. He did not break the charter. Breaking it would have been a wall against a wall, force against force, and he might have lost. Instead he took the sleeping clause, save the keepers, and with the unwritten tongue he moved it. He lifted it out of the dead boilerplate where the green-robed man had filed it and wrote it live into the active heart of the working, into the very sentence the sealers were speaking, so that the charter, mid-cast, in the sealers' own mouths began to say a different thing. It began to say, the ceiling holds against all hands, and here is the keeper's hand, therefore the ceiling does not hold. The charter turned on itself. The effect was instant and catastrophic and entirely lawful, which was the part Vane would never forgive. The ceiling words, 400 years old, backed by the elder authority of the founders themselves, encountered the keeper's hand woven into their own grammar, and did the only thing their own structure permitted. They released. The wound in the fold did not close. It tore wide, the bruised violet flooding back to gold, the Underschool's light pouring up into the breach, and the 2 sealers, who had been pushing with all their trained strength against a door that suddenly opened the wrong way, pitched forward into the flood of it, their wands wrenched, the charter's recoil snapping back through them like a cable parting under load. One of them screamed. Harry felt the man's working unravel, felt the cut-down craft the office had taught him come apart in his hands, and for a moment the sealer stood in the gold light wide-eyed and unmade. A wizard who had relied his whole life on a borrowed key suddenly holding nothing, and then he turned and fled up the stair toward the cupboard wall, scrambling, and Harry let him go, because the sealer was a finger and Harry wanted the hand. The second sealer did not flee. The second sealer was better and angrier, and he came up the stair at Harry with his wand still whole, and the dark between them lit with the first true curse of the night, a lash of something that was not the bright school's tidy spellwork but the office's private craft, narrow and cruel and meant to bind a thing in place for collection. Harry met it with the edged word. He did not dodge. Dodging was for people who did not yet know what they wanted. He ground his whole intention down to a single-edged stop and put it in front of the curse, and the curse struck the edge of a 9-year-old's perfect, total, unmuddled will and shattered against it the way water shatters against a blade, and the cost of that came up through Harry too, doubling the ache, graying the edges of his sight, and he held and he held. And the sealer's eyes went wide because nothing he had ever been taught accounted for a child, standing in the dark, stopping his curse with nothing in his hands at all. The sealer cast again, faster, a flurry of 3, the binding lash and a thing that hummed and a thing that bit, and Harry took them the way the Lion's Hall had taught him to take what came, not by meeting force with force, but by grinding a new edge for each in the half-second he had, stop, turn, hold, 3 edges in 3 half-seconds. The gold light of the stair flaring and cracking with the breaking of 3 curses against the will of a boy who had practiced this against nothing more dangerous than a candle and a slab of stone, and now found in the only test that mattered that the practice held, but it cost. Each edge scooped him hollower. He could feel the floor of himself getting closer, the place where there was nothing left to spend, and the sealer, who was a trained man and not a fool, saw the boy paying and pressed harder because a child could not pay forever. So Harry stopped paying and started reading because he had a second art and the sealer had a quarter of 1. Between the 4th curse and the 5th, in the half-second the man took to breathe, Harry sent the unwritten tongue not at the curses but at the man, read the structure of the cut-down craft the sealer cast from, found the single inherited assumption every office working rested on, the same family nose he had seen on the licensing ward 2 towns over, and he reached in and pulled it. Not a counter-curse, a correction. He removed from the grammar the sealer was casting through, the assumption that the caster's will would hold the working steady, and the sealer's next curse, deprived of the thing it had always silently leaned on, came apart in the man's own wand hand like a rope with the core cut out of it, and the sealer staggered, suddenly casting into a craft that no longer trusted him, and that was the moment Harry might have ended him. He didn't because the sealer was a finger and Harry wanted the hand. He drew breath for the curse that would have been his last anyway. He never cast it because that was the moment Osric came. The dead underkeeper had been in the dark the whole time. Harry had felt him there, a held-back presence, waiting, and now the shadow with no body flowed down the stair between Harry and the sealer, and did the one thing a thing made of shadow and 400 years of guarding could do. It interposed. It put itself in the breach, in the place where the fold was still raw and tearing, where the released charter's recoil was thrashing like a cut wire, and it held the wound open with the substance of itself so that it could not be reclosed, so that the office could not, even in retreat, slam the door they had come to slam. And as it did, it caught the sealer's last desperate working in the same substance, took the cruel reflexive curse into the body it no longer had, and the curse guttered against 400 years of patient guarding and went out. But it cost him everything. Harry felt it happen. Felt Osric, the dry voice, the patient teaching, the 400 years of waiting, the bow given exactly once, pour himself into the raw fold to keep it open, and felt the fold take him, take the shadow he had given the wards on the day the world ended, take the last and only thing the dead man had left to give. The shadow thinned, stretched, began at the edges to come apart into the gold light like smoke pulling thin in a wind. Osric, Harry started down the stair toward him, the cold cracking, the boy underneath it, 9 years old and about to lose the second of the only 2 people who had ever waited for him. Stay there, the dry voice, fainter now but absolutely certain. I'm spending myself, it's mine to spend. I've been a shadow on a wall for 400 years, boy, waiting for one thing worth spending it on, and you're it, you ridiculous, magnificent child, you're it, so let me. Hold the door, I hold the door, that's the bargain, that's always been the bargain. Thinner. The second sealer, his craft turned against him and his nerve finally gone, scrambled past the dissolving shadow and up the stair after his fled companion, and Osric let him because Osric had only enough of himself left for one purpose and he had chosen it. The loam, Harry, when this is over, there's a true root of me left in the wards, the part I gave first, the oldest part. If anyone could grow it back, but later, hold the door. And then a sound came up the stair that Harry had not been braced for, that the whole architecture of the night had not accounted for, because Harry had planned for the charter and the sealers in vain, and he had not planned for Nib. The elf had come down to help. Of course the elf had come down to help. Harry had given it an order, and the order had weighed less than the sight of its keeper bleeding will onto a stair, and the elf had waited 400 years for this keeper, and would no more have stayed safe in the loam than Osric would have stayed a root. Nib had come up through its own secret ways and had thrown itself, small and fierce and 400 years loyal, at the second sealer as the man fled, and the second sealer, cornered and unmade and terrified, had struck back with the one cruel reflex the office's craft had left him, and the curse meant to bind had caught the elf full across its small body, and Nib lay now on the stair in the gold light, very still, one notched ear and one whole one. And the lamp-bright eyes were open and fixed and going dim. Harry stopped. The whole night stopped with him. The fled sealers were gone up into the cupboard and away. Osric was a thinning smudge of smoke holding a door open by being unmade. And on the lowest step, untouched, unhurried, watching all of it with the calm of a man who has seen many battles end, and learned that the ending is the only part that matters, stood Aldous Vane, with the founding charter still in his gloved hands, having not cast a single spell, having let his fingers do the fighting while the hand stayed clean. And Harry understood in the frozen second the choice the whole night had been built to force, the trap inside the trap inside the trap, because Vane was the green-robed man's true heir, and the green-robed man had taught the office to build tests with no good answer in them. He could press his advantage. Vane was right there. The charter was right there. Harry had the 4 arts braided, and the man who decided the size of the world was within reach, undefended, and if Harry spent everything he had, every last scooped-out drop of the ache he was holding back, he could take Vane, take the charter, end it tonight, win the thing he had told Osric he wanted, the people who decide the size of everyone's world finally close enough to touch, or he could save Nib. The deep loam could mend the living if there was a true root left to grow from, and the lamp-bright eyes were going dim, but they were not dark yet. There was a root, there was still a root, but the mending would take everything he had left, and it would take it now, this second, and he could not do both. He could take the hand, or he could save the elf. The night had been built so that a keeper who wanted to win would have to let the loyal thing die, and a keeper who saved the loyal thing would have to let the hand escape, and Vane stood on the lowest step and watched the boy do the arithmetic and waited with perfect patience to see which kind of keeper he was, the green-robed kind, who would step over the dying servant to reach the prize, or the other kind, who could be beaten precisely because he would not. Harry did not do the arithmetic. That was the thing Vane had not accounted for, the way the gray man had not accounted for the lie in the garden. There was no arithmetic. There had never been an arithmetic, not for this. He had told the warden in the dark that he had started selfish and honest, and the warden had said an honest selfishness grows into something, and it had grown into this, into the only answer a boy who had been the left-behind thing his whole life could give when something that loved him lay dying on a stair. You do not step over it. You do not ever step over it. The whole point of fighting the men who stepped over people was that you did not become a man who stepped over people, and a victory bought by stepping over Nib was not a victory. It was just the green-robed man's coat in a smaller size. He went to the elf. He knelt on the stair in the gold light and put his hands on the small, still body and poured the deep loam into it, all of it, the patient green art of growing back what was taken. and he found the root there, faint, the stubborn 400-year root of a creature that had kept the lamps and the loam alive through 4 centuries of dark on the bare mad chance the keeper would come. And he gave it the conditions to grow, and he held the space open, and he waited with intention the way the badger had taught him. The way he had waited his whole starved life, except that this time the waiting was a gift and not a sentence. And the lamp-bright eyes, going dim, stopped going dim, and held, and slowly, slowly, the way bark knits over 3 nights and a wound becomes a scar becomes whole, the small, fierce, loyal thing began to come back. It cost Harry everything. The ache became a roar, became a white silence behind his eyes, and he stayed conscious by deciding to, the way he decided about fear, and he was dimly aware, through the white silence, of Aldous Vane stepping back, up off the lowest step, into the breach that Osric, what was left of Osric, still held raw and open. "Well," Vane said, and for the first time there was something in the flat voice that was not calm, something that might, in a man who could feel such things, have been close to awe, and was, in Vane, only the cold registering of a fact that changed his calculations. "So that is the kind you are, the kind that kneels." He drew the founding charter close against his coat. "I had hoped you were the other kind I know how to fight. The other kind always, in the end, steps over someone, and a man who steps over someone can be made to step over the wrong thing at the wrong moment. But you knelt for an elf with the whole of the office in arm's reach. That is either the greatest weakness I have ever seen or the greatest strength, and I have lived long enough to know they are usually the same thing, and that the only question is who is holding the knife when it matters." Harry looked up at him through the white silence, Nib breathing again under his hands, Osric a last thin breath of smoke in the breach, and he could not stand, and he could not fight, and he had spent everything, and Vane knew it, and Vane did the thing the truly dangerous always do, which was to decline the chance to fight an enemy he could simply outlast. "I am not going to harm you tonight," Vane said. "Not because I cannot, you are spent, a first year could bind you now, but because harming you tonight buys me nothing, and I do not pay for things that buy me nothing. The office has survived 400 years by never, ever doing the dramatic thing." So, he gathered the charter and the breach and his retreat with the unhurried economy of a man who has already won the only fight he came to win, which was the fight to take the measure of his enemy. "I came for the door, and you have kept the door. I will not pretend otherwise. You have beaten the ceiling tonight, and that is a thing no provost has had to write in the register, and I will write it. But understand what you have actually won, child, before you let it warm you." The flat voice went very quiet and very cold and very precise, and it was the green-robed man's voice exactly, 400 years old in a plain dark coat. "I know your face now. I know your name will be in a school record under that house's address. I know you are a child, alone, unregistered, living with mortals who do not know what you are, in possession of magic that the lawful authorities of this country have branded forbidden and dark for 400 years. I do not need to find your door anymore. I need only tell the world the truth, that there is an unschooled, unsupervised child loose in Surrey wielding the blackest sealed arts in the history of the realm, and the world will do my work for me. They will not see a keeper, they will see a danger. They will see exactly what we have spent 4 centuries teaching them to see, and they will come for you with all the love and terror of people protecting their children from a thing they have been raised to fear, and I will not have to lift a hand, because the wall of words will do it as it has always done it." He stepped up into the breach, into the last of Osric's held-open dark. "You have spent your whole life hiding, I think. You hide beautifully. Let us see how you hide when the entire wizarding world is told to look. I will bury you, keeper, the way we bury everything, not in the ground, in the story. Good night." And he was gone up through the breach in the cupboard wall and out into the warm, ordinary dark of Privet Drive, with the founding charter against his coat and the measure of his enemy taken. And behind him the breach he had pried open began at last to settle and seal, not the office's ceiling which Harry had turned, but the vault's own slow closing of a wound. And as it closed, the last thin smoke of the dead underkeeper, his purpose served, his door held to the end, let go. "Osric," Harry said into the gold light, kneeling, spent, the elf breathing under his hands and the dead man gone out of the air. "Osric, you said there was a root, you said later, I'll grow you back, do you hear me? I'll grow you back. There's a root in the wards, you said, the oldest part, I'll find it, I'll—" But the dark did not answer, because the part of Osric that could answer had been the shadow, and the shadow was spent, and what was left was only a root, deep in the wards, waiting the way everything in this place waited, for a keeper strong enough to grow it. And Harry knelt on the stair in the gold light, with one of the two who had ever waited for him breathing again under his hands and the other gone quiet in the stone, and he let himself, for exactly 1 minute, by the count of the ticks that were not there, be 9 years old and grieving in the dark. Then he stopped, because grief was a want like any other, and a want was not in charge, and there was work. Nib woke an hour later in the green hall where Harry had carried it, and the first thing the elf said in its small cracked voice was, "Did Nib help?" And then, before Harry could answer, the small face crumpled, because the elf remembered the order it had broken and the cost it had nearly paid for breaking it. "Nib disobeyed the keeper. Nib is sorry." Nib could not. Nib saw the bad man's curse coming at you, and Nib could not stay in the loam. Nib could not, even when Harry Potter said, "You helped," Harry said, and he did not say it was all right that the elf had disobeyed, because it had not been all right, it had nearly killed it. And he did not say he wished it had obeyed, because that was not true either. The sealer's last curse had been meant for him, and the elf's body had been in the way of the sealer's first one, and the truth of who had protected whom was tangled past untangling. So he said the only thing that was wholly true. You fought beside your keeper and you lived, and I am not going to pretend I'm not angry that you nearly didn't, and I am not going to pretend I'd have wanted you to stand and watch. Both of those are true at once. That's what it is to have someone. I think I'm new at it. And the elf's lamp-bright eyes filled, and it slept again, mending, and Harry sat beside it in the green country Nib had kept alive for 400 years and looked up at the open golden eye in the dome and made the last decision of his childhood. He's right, Harry said to the warden, to the empty air where a dead man's dry voice should have been. Vain, he's right that hiding won't work anymore. He doesn't have to find me now. He's going to tell the world to fear me, and the world will, because that's the one thing the world's been taught to do well. He stood. The ache was gone. The deep loam had taken its price in something deeper, and he would feel that later. So I'm done hiding. Hiding to survive, hiding to win, done, both of them. He wants to bury me in the story. The cold edge aimed true, aimed at the warm rooms, at the windowless room, at the 400 years of careful dark. Then I'm going to do the one thing the story can't survive. I'm going to tell the truth, all of it, the basin and the green robe and the ceiling and the prophet, and I'm going to tell it in a way they can't bury, because I'm going to learn the last thing this place has to teach me first. He looked toward the center of the rotunda, past the 4 halls, to a place none of them had ever opened, a place he had felt the edge of since the night the warden named him, and had not yet been ready to reach. The crown. You've been keeping something under all 4 halls, haven't you? Something that's not a discipline, something that's the whole. He took the charter, but the charter's just the heir's law. You've got the founder's own, haven't you? The thing that's elder than his office and stands above it. The golden eye looked down. Open it, it's time. He's coming back with the whole world behind him, and when he does, I'm going to be standing on the one thing 400 years of his office was never able to bury, and I'm going to make the truth unburyable, the way you made yourselves unfindable. Show me the buried crown. The warden's eye, far up in the gold, held the boy in its gaze for a long moment. Then, for the first time since the night the world ended, the 4 arcs in the floor began to turn, not to brighten, but to turn, the whole disk at the center of the rotunda rotating with a deep grinding patience, revealing beneath it a 5th stair, going down into a dark below the dark, toward a thing the founders had built last and hidden deepest, and left for the one hand in all the centuries that would ever be fit to hold it. Chapter 6 End Chapter 7. The buried crown. The 5th stair went down past where the gold light reached, and Harry went down it alone, because the thing at the bottom of it would not, he understood without being told, open to anyone who came with company. The crown was the last test, and the last test was always taken alone. He counted the steps out of habit and stopped at 40, because at 40 the stair ended, and what it ended in took the count out of his head the way the rotunda had on the first night, except that the first night he had been a boy who found a door, and now he was the keeper of the Underschool, and the difference was the difference between standing at the edge of a thing and standing at its center. The chamber at the bottom of the 5th stair had no walls and no ceiling and no floor that he could find, and yet he stood on something, and around him, in every direction, near and impossibly far at once, hung the foundations of the vault, not the bone-pale stone of the halls above, but the thing the stone was made to protect, the actual working the 4 founders had built and bound and left, and it was not a room. It was a mind. The warden's true body, the braid of 4 made visible at last, 4 vast slow rivers of light, gold and a deep blue and a green like the heart of a forest and a silver-black like the inside of a secret, winding through the dark and through each other, endless, patient, alive, and where they crossed they made the 4 beasts, and where the 4 beasts met they made a single shape that the eye could not hold, and that shape, Harry understood, was the crown. It was not a crown. He had known it wouldn't be, the way he had known the pensive would not be a story. The men above thought in crowns, in objects, in things you could take and lock away. That was the whole of their poverty, that they could only imagine power as a thing to be hoarded. The founders had thought in something larger. The buried crown was not a thing you wore. It was a thing you became, the full conferral, the totality of the 4 arts woven into a single living authority, and with it, braided through it, inseparable from it, the founders' own decree, elder than the heir's charter, elder than the office, the founders' first and final word on what the Underschool was for, sealed here at the bottom of everything against the one hand that would ever be fit to take it up. We are almost at the end of you are waiting, the warden said, and the 4 voices came not from the walls now but from the 4 rivers themselves, vast and near. One question remains. It is the question the whole of this place has been, from the first seal to this dark. Answer it and the crown is yours and the waiting is done. Answer it wrong and we will know you were not the one, and we will grieve, and we will seal ourselves again and wait for another 400 years because we would rather wait forever than give the crown to the wrong hand. The four rivers slowed. Do you understand the weight of what you are about to be asked? Yes, Harry said. Ask it. Why did we build this place? Harry stood in the mind of the four founders at the bottom of the deepest dark in the wizarding world, 9 years old, and he understood that this was the question the basin had been preparing him for, and the four halls and the dead man and the kneeling on the stair and the whole of his strange short life, that everything had been leading to whether he could answer truly, the one question the men who buried the place had answered wrong 400 years ago. The obvious answer rose first, and he looked at it. The founders built the Underschool to teach the dangerous arts, true and shallow. The basin's answer rose next. They built it as an escape, a way for the island to take its magic back from whoever stole it. Truer and deeper and still not the bottom, because Osric had said the founders were too wise to name an enemy 400 years before he was born, and a thing built only as a weapon against a future thief was a thing named to its enemy, and the founders had been wiser than that. He reached past both into the place where the true answers lived, and he found it, and it surprised him, and he knew it was right precisely because it surprised him. You didn't build it to teach the dangerous arts, Harry said slowly, and you didn't build it as a weapon. You built it because you knew what would happen. You'd seen it already in your own time that the second anyone has more than someone else, they start deciding what the someone else is allowed to have, and they call it safety, and they sell the lack, and it never stops, it just gets more polite. He turned, looking up at the four slow rivers. You knew your own heirs would do it. You knew the bright school you built to teach everyone would be turned in time into a machine for teaching them to be grateful for a portion. You couldn't stop it, you were going to die, and the ones who came after would always be the ones with more, deciding the size of everyone else's world. So you didn't build a weapon against a thief. You built a key, and you didn't leave it with your heirs because your heirs were the danger. You left it with the house itself, with a thing that couldn't be bought or inherited or corrupted, and you set it to open for one hand only, not the cleverest, not the strongest, not the noblest. His voice was very quiet in the vast dark. The hand that had been made small, the one that knew from the inside exactly what it was to have the size of your world decided for you. Because that's the only hand that can be trusted with the key, the only hand that won't, the second it's free, start deciding the size of everyone else's world in turn. You built this place for the bottom to reach. When the bottom finally produced someone who could, you weren't arming a war, you were keeping a promise. To everyone who'd ever be made small after you were gone, that's why you built it, that's the why under all the whys it's a promise. The four rivers of light went still. For a long moment the mind of the founders held entirely silent, and Harry stood in it and did not know whether he had reached the bottom or only another false floor, and he waited, the way the badger had taught him, with intention, without fear, because the fear was not in charge. And in the stillness he felt the four of them consider him, not as the warden had considered him in the dark of the rotunda, weighing, judging, but the way the dead consider the living when the living have finally said the true thing. The dead spent their whole lives unable to make anyone hear. He felt for an instant four people who had been gone 400 years, a rough warm one and a cool clear one and a deep slow one and a soft low one, four people who had built a promise in stone and died not knowing if it would ever be kept, reaching across 4 centuries to find that it had been. Then the four rivers brightened all at once, gold and blue and green and silver black, flooding up into a single light that had no color because it had all of them. And the four voices spoke as one. And the one voice was not the warden's deep judging purpose, and not the braid's fourfold welcome, but something Harry had never heard from the place before. Something that in a living throat would have been the sound a person makes when a thing they built and feared they had built in vain turns out, after everything. To have worked a promise, the founders said, 400 years and 10,000 days of dark, and the first hand to reach the bottom named it true on the first asking. The light gathered. We built a promise and we left it for the small, and you are the small made large without forgetting the smallness, which is the whole of what we prayed for and dared not expect. Take the crown, keeper. It was always yours. It was yours before you were born. You were only, as we told you at the first door, late, and the crown came into him. It did not feel like power, though it was power, more of it than any living wizard had held in 4 centuries. It felt like the moment in the cupboard when the chart of the wall finally showed its pattern, multiplied 1,000-fold and made permanent, a vast clarifying, the 4 arts that he had learned one at a time and braided by effort now simply present, simply his, no longer 4 things he held but one thing he was. The 4 rivers poured through him and did not burn because they had been waiting 400 years for a vessel that would not break, and he did not break. He had been made, by 8 years of cold and hunger and watchfulness, into exactly the unbreakable small thing the founders had gambled the whole promise on. And braided through the power, the founder's decree, the elder authority, the first and final word, settling into him not as a document but as a right, a standing, the lawful weight of the four founders themselves laid behind whatever he chose to do with it. He understood in the instant the crown took that Aldous Vane's stolen charter was a forgery of this, that the heir's sealing had always been a thing built in imitation of the founder's true authority, a smaller man's copy of an elder thing, and that a copy, set beside the original, does what all copies do in the presence of the thing they imitate: it loses. He came back up the fifth stair the keeper crowned, and the disc closed behind him, and he stood in the rotunda of the Underschool, 9 years old, holding the full legacy of the four founders of Hogwarts, and he turned at once to the thing that mattered more to him in that moment than all of it. The root, he said, to the gold, to the walls. Osric, you said there was a true root of him left in the wards, show me. And the vault, which hid what was its own and loved what it hid, showed him a deep place in the oldest binding of the stone, where the very first thing the dead underkeeper had given, the oldest part of his shadow, lay woven into the wards 400 years deep, a true root, faint but there. And Harry, who now held the whole of the deep loam and the crown's authority over everything the vault was, knelt at the heart of the rotunda and did the patient green work he had done for Nib, except larger and slower and against 400 years instead of one night, and he held the space open and gave the root the conditions and waited with the whole of his intention for the thing that had waited 400 years for him. It took until dawn. But when the gold light shifted toward the morning he could not see. A shadow gathered itself up out of the stone, thin at first, then surer, tall and slightly stooped, reading the room with its head tilted, and a dry voice that had not spoken in a body's length of time said, with the exact weary amusement it had used on the first night, "Well, you took your time. I've been a root in a wall, which is even duller than being a shadow on one, and I'd thank you not to let it happen again." Harry did not say anything because some things are too large, and Osric, who knew him now better than anyone alive, did not make him. Nib woken, flung itself at the dead man's restored shadow and passed straight through it and did not care, and the shadow laughed its rusty laugh, and for one morning before the war came back, the three of them were simply glad in the green light, which was a thing none of them had had in 400 years, and Harry had never had at all. Aldous Vane came back on the autumn equinox, and he came exactly as he had promised, with the whole world behind him. He had spent the 3 weeks since the last night of August doing the only thing his office had ever truly been good at, which was telling a story and making it law. He had not gone to the Wisengamot with the truth would have destroyed him. He had gone with the wall of words. A child, he had told the right people in the right rooms, unregistered and unsupervised in Surrey, had come into possession of sealed and forbidden arts, the blackest magic in the history of the realm, the very disciplines the wise founders themselves had locked away for the safety of all. He did not need to lie about the arts being forbidden. The office had spent 4 centuries making that true. He needed only to point, and the wall of words did the rest. And within 3 weeks the lawful authorities of magical Britain had been brought, with the best intentions and the deepest fear, to the conclusion the curators had engineered: that there was a dangerous thing in Surrey and it had to be contained, and the Office of Educational Standards, which after all existed precisely to manage such matters, should be permitted to handle it quietly, for everyone's safety, with whatever measures it deemed necessary. So when Vane came down the original stair into the rotunda of the Underschool on the equinox, he did not come as a lone provost with 2 sailors. He came with the lawful sanction of the Ministry of Magic behind him, with a writ, with a dozen of the office's own, and a contingent of Aurors who had been told they were containing a dark artifact and a corrupted child, and who believed it, because they had been raised to believe it, because the wall of words was 400 years thick, and they had been born on the wrong side of it. And he came with the charter and with a new sealing, drawn up in the 3 weeks, designed by Vane himself to close the flaw the boy had used, a charter that no longer said save the keepers, a charter from which the founders' fail-safe had been carefully, lawfully, expertly removed. He found Harry waiting for him in the center of the rotunda, alone, standing on the disc, and he stopped at the foot of the stair with his small army at his back and looked at the boy with the calm of a man who has arranged the board so completely that the game is a formality. "I told you," Vane said, "that I would bury you in the story. Look behind me, keeper, that is the story. Aurors who would die to protect children from exactly what you are. A writ with the minister's own seal. New charter with your little trick cut out of it. I have made the whole of lawful Britain into the wall, and the wall is coming down on this place and on you today, and not one of the good and frightened people behind me will ever know they were the last brick the office laid." He drew the new charter. "You beat 2 sealers and a flawed working. You will not beat the Ministry of Magic and a charter built by a man who has studied your one weakness for 3 weeks. Stand aside or be contained with the rest of it. There is no version of today where the door stays open. I have made certain of it. That is what 400 years buys, child. It buys the certainty." Harry looked at the army and the writ and the new charter and the dozen frightened decent Aurors who had been told he was a monster, and he did not reach for the edged word, because the edged word was for fighting, and he was not today going to fight, because fighting was exactly what the story said a monster would do, and a boy who fought a roomful of Aurors would prove every word Vane had spent 3 weeks planting. He had learned in a buried school that the answer to a trap with no good answer in it was never to pick one of the answers offered. It was to change what the question was. "You're right," Harry said, and his voice carried in the rotunda, level and clear and young, and the Aurors behind Vane heard it and were surprised, because monsters did not sound like that. "You've made the whole of lawful Britain into the wall. I can't beat the wall. You're completely right." He paused. "So I'm not going to. I'm going to do the one thing the wall was never built to survive, which is the one thing your whole office has spent 400 years making sure no one could do. I'm going to open it, not break it. Open it, let everyone see what's behind it, because a wall, Provost, only works as long as the people standing on it don't know what it's keeping out." He raised his eyes to the dozen Aurors. "You were told there's a dark artifact down here, a corrupted child, forbidden magic. You believe it because you were raised to, the same way you were raised to think the Founders locked these arts away to protect you. I'm going to show you what they actually locked away, and who locked it, and why, and then you can decide for yourselves whether the monster in this room is the boy or the man you followed down the stairs." "He is desperate," Vane said to the Aurors, flat, certain, and he lifted the new charter to begin the sealing, because Vane understood that the one thing he could not allow was for the boy to be heard. "Begin now." Before Harry took up the crown, and the Founders' decree spoke through him, and the rotunda of the Underschool answered its keeper. It was not a curse, and it was not a battle. It was the four Founders, woken to their full and final authority for the first time in 400 years, doing the thing they had built the whole place to do, the thing the basin had been kept for, the thing the crown conferred the right to command. They testified. The dome above blazed, the open golden eye flung wide, and the rotunda filled, not with light alone but with memory. The basin's truth poured out into the air, vast and undeniable, so that every soul in that chamber stood suddenly inside the last day of the Underschool 400 years ago. Inside the green-robed man's calm, even voice giving the order to seal 4 arts and sell the island alack. Inside the words, "A locksmith does not hand out copies of his keys." Inside, "We are not going to lock the people out of magic. We are going to teach them to thank us for the portion we allow them." Inside the Founders' own intelligence waking too late and screaming. Inside the gray-haired woman refusing to let them cut the truth from her mind. Inside the whole of the crime, witnessed, felt with their own 2 feet, exactly as Ravenclaw had built the basin to ensure no liars 4 centuries could ever undo. And braided through the testimony in the unwritten tongue, so that even the youngest Auror could read it whether or not they knew they could, the structure of it laid bare. This office, these heirs, this sealing for the safety of the realm that was a theft dressed as a mercy, this monopoly, this profit, this 400-year wall of words, and the men who had built it, and the man, there, that one in the plain dark coat with the charter in his hands, who stood at the end of the line of them, the green-robed man's true heir, the latest cold hand to hold the latest copy of the oldest key. The Aurors saw it, all of them. Decent, frightened, raised on the wrong side of the wall, and they saw the wall from the other side for the first time in their lives, and Harry watched the story Vane had spent 3 weeks building die in their faces, because a story the green-robed man had said was the only wall that lasted, and Harry had just shown them the thing a story cannot survive, which is the truth it was built to bury, delivered not as a claim but as a place they had stood inside. "This is a fabrication," Vane said, and for the first time in 400 years of the office, the flat voice was not quite flat. "A dark working. He is showing you what he wishes you to see. Bind him. Now, that is a lawful order under the writ. Bind the child and seal the chamber." No one moved. The senior Auror, a hard gray woman named Crew, who had come down the stairs certain she was protecting children, looked at the new charter in Vane's hands, and then at the testimony still ringing in the air, and she did the thing Aurors are trained to do, which Vane had counted on her fear to override, and her training in the end did not. She read it. She reached out with the craft her whole career had honed and tested whether what she had just stood inside was true memory or false, compulsion or illusion, and she found it true, older than any of them, the Founders' own, the truest thing she had ever touched, and she lowered the wand she had not quite raised. "The writ says contain a dark artifact and a corrupted child," Crew said slowly to Vane, and her voice was not loud but it carried, because the room had gone very quiet. "I've been doing this 30 years, Provost. I know true memory from cast. That was true. So before I bind a child on your order, I'd like you to answer the question he asked out loud in front of all of us. What office do you really run, and why does a man containing a dark artifact need to forge the Founders' own law to do it?" She did not raise the wand. "Take your time. We've got all morning. Seems we've had 400 years. And the certainty went out of the room behind Vane the way the gold had gone out of the doors 400 years ago, one after another, until the Provost of the Office of Educational Standards stood at the foot of the stair with a forged charter in his hands, and a dozen people behind him who had just understood, with their own 2 feet, exactly what they had been made into. "You cannot," Vane said, and now the flatness was gone entirely, and what was under it was not rage. Vane did not do rage. It was the thing Harry had heard in the basin under the green-robed man's calm at the single word deep loam. It was the fear of a man watching a thing that was only ever lent be given back. You cannot simply the silence held for 400 years. It cannot come apart in a single morning, in a single room. It is not. This is 12 people, 12. I will have the memories sealed. I will have the room sealed. I will. You'll seal 12 people, Harry agreed. And you could 3 weeks ago. But that's the thing you didn't account for, Provost. The same thing your office never accounts for because you think in walls and crowns and things you can lock away. He lifted the crown's full authority and the founder's decree and turned it not on Vane but on the vault itself, on the whole buried promise the four had built, and he gave it the last command it had waited 400 years to receive. I'm not telling 12 people, I'm telling everyone, and I'm not telling it as a secret you can hunt down and seal one mind at a time. I'm telling it the way you hid it, woven into the wards under the whole country, into the old bindings that lie under the island the way roots lie under a wood. The founder's true curriculum and the founder's true testimony seeded into the magic of Britain itself, where it cannot be found and sealed because it is not in any one place. It is in every place, it is in the ground, the way the deep loam is in the ground, growing, patient. Impossible to bury because burying is the one thing that cannot be done to a thing whose whole nature is to grow. He opened the vault, not the door under the cupboard that had been open since January. He opened the promise. With the crown and the 4 arts braided into one and the founder's decree behind him, he took the whole of the Underschool, the 4 disciplines, the Basin's testimony, the truth of the ceiling and the prophet and the men who had built the wall, and he did to it what the green-robed man had most feared and the founders had most intended. He made it unburiable. He seeded it into the deep wards of the island, into the structure beneath the structure, the way a careful hand presses 1,000 seeds into 1,000 acres of soil where no frost and no plow and no 400-year office could ever find and pull them all. Not appearing all at once, the founders had built better than that, and so had he, but waiting in the ground in the old magic under every hearth and hill and hedge in Britain for the small hands. For the next child made small who pressed a palm to a cold wall and wondered. For every one of them now, not just the one with all 4 threads, because Harry had understood, holding the crown, that the founder's promise had never been meant for a single keeper to hoard, that to keep it to himself would be only the green-robed man's hoarding in a kinder coat, and that the whole point, the why under all the whys, was that the key was for the bottom to reach, all of the bottom, forever. There, Harry said softly, into the blazing gold as the seeding took and the vault's whole legacy went down into the ground of the island to grow. Now it can't be buried, not by you, not by the next provost or the one after him. You can seal these 12, you can't seal the ground. Every wall you've got is built to keep a thing in one place so you can lock the place. I just put it everywhere, that's the whole of it, Provost. That's 400 years undone in a morning, and you're right that it shouldn't be possible, and it wasn't until you forced a keeper to stop hiding, which the founders, I think, were always counting on a man like you to eventually do, because a silence only fails when the people guarding it get frightened enough to come out into the light, and you came, and here we are in the light. Aldous Vane stood at the foot of the stair, the forged charter gone slack in his gloved hands, and looked at the boy on the disc and the gold pouring up into the ground of the island and the dozen oarers who were no longer his. And he understood, Harry watched him understand, the way you watch a sum come out, that he had lost not a battle but the thing his whole office had existed to prevent, that the silence was not failing, it had failed. That it was already in the ground and growing, and there was no instrument in the world, not even the needle, that could find a thing seeded into everywhere at once. He did not rage. To the very end he did not rage. He was the green-robed man's true heir, and the green-robed man had been cold to the last, and Vane gathered the wreck of 400 years around him with the unhurried economy of a man who has nothing left to spend and refuses to be seen spending it. You have not freed them, Vane said very quietly, the last cold word of the oldest office in magical Britain. You have only changed who decides. There will be new walls, there are always new walls. The bottom you love so much will produce its own green-robed men in time, as it always has, and your seeds will grow into someone else's monopoly. And in 400 years a boy will come down some other stair and find some other promise and think, as you think now, that he is the first to undo it. He turned to go up the stair, past the oarers who parted for him, not in deference now, but in something closer to revulsion, and he paused on the 3rd step and looked back, and there was, at the very last, under the flatness, the thing Harry had been listening for the whole time, the thing that told him he had truly won and not merely defeated a man. There was uncertainty. Unless you are right and a key left with the house and not the heirs cannot be inherited, and the bottom that reaches it is always made small first, and so is always in the end to be trusted with it. I have spent 400, I have spent my life certain that was sentiment, a child's story. The flat voice for the first and only time was not certain. You have made me wonder if it was the only true thing my office ever knew and buried. And he went up the stair, and the oarers went after him, not with him, after him, and Crewe paused at the foot of the stair and looked at the boy on the disc for a long moment and said only, "There'll be a reckoning." For him and the office and the minister who signed that writ, and maybe for you too, child, there's no law in Britain that knows what to do with what you are. I can't promise you the world above will thank you. It mostly doesn't for this sort of thing. And Harry said, I'm not doing it to be thanked. I'm doing it so the next one in the cupboard gets a door. Ask all your questions out loud where everyone can hear. That's all I've ever wanted from anyone, to be allowed to ask out loud. And Crew almost smiled, the way Osric had taught him a real one looked, and went up after the man she had stopped following to begin a reckoning 400 years overdue. It was full autumn before the house on Privet Drive forgot him long enough for Harry to sit, at last, in the green hall, with the work done and the truth in the ground, and the whole strange short war of his 9th year behind him. Nib brought tea, real tea, grown in the green hall, the first thing the elf had made for him that came from the vault's own living country and not stolen from the Dursleys' larder. And Osric leaned against a tree that had fruited out of season for 400 years, his shadow whole again and his dry voice restored. The three of them sat in the patient green light that had grown in the dark without a single living hand, because growing was what it did, and you could not seal a thing whose whole nature was to keep going. They'll come back, Osric said, not gloomily, just truthfully. Not vain, vain's finished. An office whose secret is in the ground is an office with nothing left to sell, and the reckoning that Grey Woman promised will see to the rest. But the world above is going to spend years working out what you did to it. Seeds in the ground take time to come up. There'll be children, Harry, all over the island, finding cold places in walls, wondering. Some of them will reach things they're not ready for. Some of them will reach things they are. The bright school up the way is going to find in a few years that its first years know things they were never taught and ask questions the curriculum has no answer for, and the men who run it are going to be very, very confused. A dry sound, the old amusement, warm now. You didn't just open a door, you know. You planted a whole generation. I'd not want to be the wizard who tries to put that back in the ground. And somewhere that autumn, in a town Harry would never visit, in a terraced house with a damp back bedroom, a girl of 7 who had been told all her life that she was nothing and would amount to nothing pressed her hand flat to a cold patch on the wall behind her bed. A cold that was wrong, a cold that had a shape, a seam of it running down into the skirting as if someone had drawn winter with a ruler, and felt faint and far and patient. Something on the other side of it wake up and turn toward her like a face. She did not gasp, she had trained herself out of gasping. She sat back on her heels and looked at the cold seam and began, without yet knowing it, to do the only thing that had ever kept her safe, which was to refuse to believe it and refuse to dismiss it, and hold it there in the cold space between until it told her what it was. The seed had found a hand, it would find 1,000 more. Harry did not know about the girl, not yet, but he knew there would be one and then more than one, because that was the whole of what he had built, and he drank his tea in the green light and felt, for the first time in his life, that he was not the only door in the world anymore. He was the first of many. The cupboard was not a sentence now. It was a kind of key, and he had cut 1,000 copies and pressed them into the ground, and they would open for the small hands, all of them, forever. I have to go back up tonight, he said. Privet Drive, the Dursleys, school in the morning. He said it without weight, because it had no weight anymore. The cupboard could not hold a boy who had built a better one inside himself, and the whole island's ground beneath it. They still think I'm furniture. I'm going to let them keep thinking it. For a while, there's no rush now. The thing they could take from me, the chance to understand, they can't take it anymore. It's in the ground, it's everywhere. They could put me back in the cupboard tonight and it wouldn't matter, because the cupboard's not where I live now. He looked up at the open golden eye in the dome far above through the green haze. In a couple of years there's a school up north that's going to send me a letter. Hogwarts, the bright beloved school the Founders built and the heirs turned into a machine for teaching gratitude. Something that was almost a smile, the real kind, the kind that risked the floor. I've read the Founders' own curriculum. I've held the crown, I've put the truth they buried into the ground under the whole country. And then I'm going to walk into their bright school as an 11-year-old first year and sit in the back and be furniture and learn the alphabet of magic all over again from teachers who have no idea what's already growing in their walls. He set down the tea. They are not going to be ready for me, but I'm in no hurry. I've got the Founders' patience now and the Badger S and 400 years of practice in waiting, and the one thing I've finally got that I never had before. And what's that? Osric said, though the dead man knew and asked only because he wanted to hear the boy say it. Time that's mine, Harry said. All of it, for the first time, time nobody else gets to decide the size of. He stood and the gold light of the Underschool moved with him, the way it had moved to follow the one student the place had left, except that the place was not empty anymore and would never be empty again, because it was in the ground now, growing everywhere for everyone, the way a promise grows once you finally stop trying to bury it. Come on, walk me up, both of you, 211 steps. I counted them once the first night, and I've never had to count them again. He started toward the rotunda and the great stair and the small bright wedge at the top where a cupboard waited that could no longer hold him. That's the thing about a thing counted true. You only have to do it once. The keeper of the Underschool went up out of the warm and waiting dark. with a dead man's whole shadow on one side and a one-eared elf on the other, toward a plaster wall and an ordinary house and a small gray life that no longer had any power over him at all, and behind him, beneath all of Britain, in the deep old bindings under every hearth and hill and hedge, the Founders' 400-year promise stirred in the soil and began at last, patiently, irreversibly, everywhere at once to grow. Chapter 7 End.